Chapter 526, Chapter 523 Panther God, I'm just a cute kitten, and I don't know anything. The origins of Wakanda's vibranium vein were from meteorites millions of years ago. It came crashing down from the sky on the African continent, exterminating the indigenous people around it. This was a great disaster and a gift from heaven. The scattered vibranium mixed with the soil and greatly transformed the surrounding vegetation. Later on, one by one, 5 migrating tribes re-entered this rich, untouched land. They named it Wakanda and worked hard to unearth the strange and precious vibranium source. However, there was no harmony between the 5 tribes. In order to compete for more land and more mines, there were always conflicts and struggles among the indigenous people. At this point, Bast appeared. He guided a powerful warrior of a certain tribe to the heart-shaped herb. That strange plant could give human beings unimaginable strength, speed and reflexes. Thus, the mighty warrior who was chosen by the Panther God, Bast, united the 5 tribes with absolute force and became the first king. And as the ancestor of the Black Panthers, he established Wakanda's capital. It had been handed down from generation to generation until today. The vibranium meteorite was buried deep underground, creating a rich vein that even the Wakandans themselves hadn't fully explored. For generations, the kings had simply mined the inexhaustible supply of vibranium. It was easy for them to seize wealth, profit, and live a life of peace and contentment. In that respect, Wakanda was no different from resource-rich countries like the United Arab Emirates, and its capital was like Dubai. Therefore, compared with the concept of a country, it was more like a huge mine. Just like Dubai, that was seen as a gas station masquerading as a country. Because of that, Wakanda kept a close eye on the export and production of vibranium and considered smuggling a heavy offense. Once found, even if the culprit was a member of the royal family, they would all be severely punished, placed in jail and imprisoned for life. That's a complete vein. T-Shaker's voice trembled. He appeared to be in disbelief and had raised his hand to rub his eyes. However, that huge shadow slowly moved. It was getting closer and clearer. How can it be? How can it be? The young king's expression changed, and his chest rose and fell like drawn bellows. If he hadn't taken the heart-shaped herb, he might have lost his breath and passed out. T-Shaker's heart ached to the point of suffocating as he gazed at the huge vein of ore rising up in the sky and levitating. Go and call the rest of the tribe leaders. And have the general gather the army. Forget it. He's a man that can carry mountains. Halfway through his sentence, the young king abandoned his previous idea. In his heart, there was a vague guess. On this planet, there was once the most powerful human being known to man. The other party led the Allies, defeated the Axis, and was a war hero. The Aryan super soldiers, the king of Atlantis, the mutant conspirator, were all defeated by that man. It was said that even werewolves and blood clans in the underworld bow to him. The Temple of the Three hidden in the mist, and the legendary Master, were closely related to him. Although a long time ago, that director of S.H.I.E.L.D. no longer appeared in the public eye and gradually disappeared. However, the legendary stories about him had never stopped. From movies to novels, even documentaries. As long as it was related to Superman, it would become the hottest key to wealth in Hollywood. Damn it, if it's really that man, Wakanda will lose more than a vibranium vein. T-Shaker muttered with some sorrow. Once, the underwater world of Atlantis raised its army to march onto land and raid New York. However, under Superman's iron fist, in the end, they waved the white flag and declared their surrender. From beginning to end, that clash of civilizations between sea and land ended even faster than the Blitz, breaking France's record. The lesson from the past was there, and T-Shaker wasn't confident enough to think that Wakanda could do better than the Atlanteans. Much less confident enough to think that Black Panther was stronger than the Sea King and could keep his dignity in front of Superman. 20 minutes later, Luke, who had moved a vibranium vein, returned to the royal palace in Wakanda with a bemused face. The little gift was placed in his underworld. Bast, the rounded panther god, had a more welcoming attitude than before. If anything, when he first fell into Luke's clutches, he could barely maintain the reserve and aloofness of a god. Now, he had completely changed into Superman's pet. Now and then, he would even rub his head against Luke and look at him with big eyes full of worship. A proper cute act. He didn't care about anything else, let alone the surprised look on the king's face. He was just a poor, weak and helpless kitten who knew nothing. Not to mention stopping Luke from moving the vibranium. Even if the other party wanted to destroy Wakanda, Bast wouldn't consider it a problem. He just had to move on to the next tribe and restart it. Your Majesty, are you ill? You don't look good. Seeing T-Shaker leaning on the throne, covering his chest, and looking like he was struggling to breathe, Luke asked with a look of concern. I'm all right, just a little heartburn, an old problem. The young king took a deep breath and answered. That's good that you're okay. Take care of yourself. Luke rubbed the head of Panther God and whispered, thanks to His Majesty's generosity, I got so much vibranium for nothing. To be honest, I was a little embarrassed at first, but Elder Ajuda told me to help myself. Because of his enthusiasm, I took a bit more. Standing aside with vacant eyes, Elder Ajuda seemed like he hadn't regained his senses. Hearing these words, he almost fainted. He remembered that in the underground mines, Luke had only spread his arms. Then the entire vein shook and slowly rose into the air. The impact of that scene was beyond words. It's fine, a mere bit of vibranium. You need not take it to heart, honored guest. T-Shaker glared at Elder Ajuda, who was still in a daze, and then said word for word. There will be a dinner party later. I hope you will be kind enough to attend. Luke raised an eyebrow, slightly surprised to see the King of Wakanda make such a humble gesture. Although he showed mercy, he didn't empty all the vibranium veins all at once and only carried away an extended branch of one of the veins. Other people, however, would have long regretted it and flown into a rage. After all, estimates were based on the price of vibranium on the international market. Wakanda had suffered a heavy loss this time, amounting to emptying half of the country's reserves. Holding back so much. Looks like he knows who I am. Luke pondered for a moment and concluded. Wakanda was at least an independent country, and T-Shaker had eyes and undercover agents all over the world. He didn't recognize him before, but it could be because Superman had disappeared for too long and forgotten. But with careful investigation, he was sure that Wakanda would soon find the clues. Thank you for your Majesty's kindness. A dinner party isn't necessary. I have things to deal with, so I won't bother anymore. Luke waved his hand and refused the invitation. There will naturally be a chance to meet again in the future. Wakanda is a strong and promising country. Sooner or later, it will enter the world stage. T-Shaker's eyelids twitched, and the hand over his heart fell. He understood Luke's meaning. He hesitated and didn't know how to answer. Being conservative, closed and refraining from communication with the outside world was a strategy that Wakanda had always used. But as times changed, T'Chaka, who had studied in Europe and seen and experienced the world, didn't want to stay a mere conformist. He had ideas for change but lacked the courage. Other tribe leaders, even within the royal family, had a large number of conservative forces. They were only looking at a short-term gain, and unless the day came when the vibranium mine was exhausted, they would always be content with what they had now and choose to stop there. Luke's appearance seemed to change all this. "Well then, since our honored guest has something to do, I won't force you to stay." T'Chaka thought of Superman's status and strength, and his heart slightly moved. If Wakanda had S.H.I.E.L.'s support, it might be able to rapidly rise in the African continent and lead its compatriots to freedom. As for what it would cost, Luke could have clearly moved all the vibranium veins and decimated Wakanda's future. But he didn't do that, he just took one of the veins. Looking at the panther, it wasn't difficult to see what kind of character and method Superman had. "Let's call it a day." Luke petted Bast, left the main hall of the palace, and went to look for Carol. Half an hour later, it was confirmed that Superman and his companion had left. T'Chaka looked at the panther crouching in the hall. Bast, who had previously acted like a kitten, had a golden glint in his eyes as if he was displeased. The young king quickly gave up his seat and saw the chubby panther gracefully walk up the steps and jump onto the throne. He comfortably coiled up into a ball and dozed off. "Is this the panther god of Wakanda?" T'Chaka bitterly smiled. Comment. 14 comments. Vote. Chapter 527, Chapter 524. Standing at the top, the so-called surprise. Luke, who returned with a full load, opened a transmission portal and arrived in Kamataj. Before he left Earth 1024, he entrusted S.H.I.E.L.D to the Sorcerer Supreme. Although, according to the salted fish character of the Ancient One, she might not always watch it and deal with problems like a nanny. But if he wanted to know what happened during his absence, it was best to find the Sorcerer Supreme. At the other end of the portal, it happened to be the open space at Kamataj. At this time, a group of novice apprentices stood in rows in twos and threes. Under the guidance of the master, they were learning how to open a spatial portal. "Master Wong, long time no see." Luke said hello with a smile when he saw his chubby figure and serious face. Holding a stack of books, the other party seemed to have just come out of the library. Unlike the universe where he became the Sorcerer Supreme, the Wong of this world was still very young. His face wasn't so round and unfriendly, as if someone owed him money. "Who are you? Don't you know that in Kamataj, you aren't allowed to drink alcohol?" Young Master Wong saw that Luke was dressed differently from the other masters in Kamataj and that his right hand was supporting a drunk woman. He couldn't help but frown with that round face of his, wanting to rebuke such behavior. Kamataj did have status classes, such as the Sorcerer Supreme, then her own disciples, the administrators of the three sanctums, and so on and so forth. But the atmosphere these years had changed. Because the Ancient One had always attached little importance to rules, she advocated speaking freely, and freedom was paramount. This made Kamataj's income threshold much lower and the number of apprentices much higher. Of course, it also carried other problems. For example, going astray and being seduced by the dark dimension. Not everyone could control themselves in the face of power. "Forget, you are not the old hotpot Wong." Luke raised his eyebrows. He equated the guy with the hot pot Wong from the universe where he was Sorcerer Supreme. For no other reason than the fact that the other party's side dishes were fantastic. The days of helping Stephen Strange and substituting for him, eating hot pot and shabu-shabu and then supervising Doctor Strange's workouts were the greatest expectation of each day. Is the Ancient One in? Luke ignored Master Wong's surprised look and directly asked. He glanced around and didn't feel the aura of the Sorcerer Supreme. As the top powerhouse among the 9 realms, she could stand alongside Odin. The Ancient One could shine like a bright torch in Luke's eyes. So, Mr. Cavill is here. Long time no see, you still look the same. Before the young Master Wong snapped at Luke's impudence, Master Hamir, who had a broken arm, strode over with a flourish. He knew Superman better than this rash young man and immediately greeted him. Master Hamir, dressed in a Taoist-like robe, speaking and acting in an ancient style, was an affable elder who had been a practicing disciple at Kamataj for many years. Wong, this is Superman, a war hero admired by the world and a guest always welcomed by Kamataj. You should show some respect. Hamir glanced at Master Wong and motioned for the other party to step down. He then held out his hand and invited Luke into the central hall. The astronomic bronze sphere spun continuously, its surface emitting a lava-like hue. It was reasonable for such an important place like Kamataj to be off-limits to outsiders. But Luke's relationship with the Ancient One wasn't simple. Master Hamir had heard of those rumors. Most of them were spread from the devils of hell or from the corners of the shadowy world. Similar to the secret affair between the Sorcerer Supreme and Superman, there were more than a dozen versions for all ages and palates. Of course, Master Hamir didn't believe those flimsy rumors. He just felt that the Sorcerer Supreme's attitude towards Luke was indeed somewhat different. The secret contact between the 3 sanctums and S.H.I.E.L.D, and the establishment of the Magic Congress. In the past, the Ancient One would never have attempted such a drastic change, no matter how much she would have dared to challenge the rules. The Sorcerer Supreme had recently gone to the outer dimension, and she seemed to be in a hurry. Master Hamir said without skipping a beat. However, before she left, she specially ordered the 3 sanctums to watch over S.H.I.E.L.D and be on the lookout for any trouble they might encounter. Luke slightly nodded his head and seriously said, "Thank you, Master." Unsurprisingly, the Ancient One was worthy of the title of avid slacker and left everything to others. Outer dimension. Luke's heart moved, and he continued to ask, "Is there some kind of crisis happening?" The Sorcerer Supreme had always been solely responsible for the safety and order of the universe. How could she skip work without saying anything? As a veteran who had made the jump out of the universe's box and even made the trip across the multiverses, Luke naturally knew what that outer dimension was. The Sorcerer Supreme had been on business trips before, but it was only limited to the dimensional worlds of this universe. For example, subdimensions like Hell, Limbo, the Dark Dimension and so on. The outer dimension usually referred to the strange world that existed in another box outside this universe. The Sorcerer Supreme didn't say but vaguely mentioned it. "Mr. Cavill, you will see her soon." Master Hamir smiled and frankly said so. Luke pondered for a moment, roughly suspecting something, but wasn't sure. Over the years, how has S.H.I.E.L.D been? Instead of obsessing over the charade the Sorcerer Supreme was playing, he cut to the chase. "All is still well, very calm." Master Hamir was concise. He thought for a moment and then added, "With Ms. Peggy Carter's management, it doesn't look like anything is happening on the surface. But in private, there was a lot of minor problems involving political struggles, power struggles and the like, but Kamatage isn't good at dealing with that, so we didn't get involved. With that, the broken-armed master used a projection spell to reveal those recorded world events and the turmoil of the situation. Luke watched intently in silence. When the third pole of the world disappeared, it would naturally trigger changes. Fortunately, the direction of the world hadn't been stirred into a tangled mess yet, losing all control thanks to the butterfly effect he caused. After the Cold War, the Red Empire still disintegrated and collapsed. Leviathan and Hydra, as a result, collided violently. The two sworn enemies were finally merged under SHIELD. Upon entering the peace phase, Howard Stark was married, and Captain America and the Winter Soldier retired together. With Luke's well-prepared plan, the White Queen successfully promoted the Mutant Registration Act. Cavill Academy for the Gifted officially entered the public eye, and it enrolled a large number of new students. Some of the most outstanding children had become prestigious leaders of the younger generation among the mutants. For example, Charles Xavier, who got a professor's degree and stayed as a teacher at the Mutant Academy. Then there's Eric Lehnsherr, who chose to join Task Force X and travel all over the world. Compared with their predecessors like the White Queen, Wolverine and Sabretooth, they were more energetic and aggressive. One actively pursued further rights for his compatriots by attending various talks and speeches and even making public appearances on television programs to express his views. The other liked to show strength and seize power, thus uniting the group of mutants who were similar to him with his charisma. "They are all your students, Mr. Cavill," Master Hamir said with a smile. To this day, Superman's bronze statue still stood at the Mutant Academy as a symbol that every student looked up to. Luke lamented the fact that he started with the outbreak of World War II and joined the Super Soldier program with Captain America. Then defeat the Axis, the Aryan Super Soldiers. Along the way, he had stood at the highest point in the world before he knew it. The two young leaders of the mutant were his students. He built SHIELD, and before Hydra could make any waves, it was defeated and incorporated. Even Iron Man, who started the cinematic universe, and made the Afghan caves a famous plot point for every fellow traveler like him, was just now coming of age. And his father not only didn't die under the Winter Soldier's iron fist, but he also took the name Iron Man early on, making Tony Stark a second generation. Outside this universe, the Collector and the Grandmaster, the brothers who were both elders of the universe, had seen what Superman could do. Luke Cavill, that fearsome human from Earth whose reputation shook the galaxy and spread to the 9 realms. Then, Ronan, the accuser of the Kree Empire, was beaten by General Zod, and his body was left paralyzed. Since then, he would brand this planet Earth so deeply in his heart that he would never dream of showing the slightest arrogance there. Captain Marvel, who had to go through some twists and turns, also allowed Luke to bring her back. Everything was changing. Naturally, as the biggest villain, Thanos, who was supposed to make an ominous entrance, might not even be enough for Luke to break a sweat. Even if he collected all 6 Infinity Stones, put on his gauntlet and snapped his fingers. Superman, who was already at the peak of this single universe, wouldn't be fazed. Of course, if the Mad Titan could open up, get the heart of the universe and push open the doors of the Omniverse. Or, with the passage of time, turn into his ultimate version, King Thanos. That was another matter. All in all, Luke wasn't only at the top of the human world, he had reached the end of the single universe. With one more step forward, We have to face the 5 gods of the universe, the annihilation wave, living tribunal, the beyond us, molecule man. Those kinds of existence. What a wonderful ride. Luke looked back and couldn't help but feel something akin to an old man's sigh of relief. When he thought about it, he was no longer interested in the Skrulls on Earth and in the 3 galactic empires. As for the Defenders, which may appear in the future, he was even more uninterested. A villain destroying the world. With Superman around, no more conspirators or ambitious people would dare risk their lives for trouble. A crisis that could lead to the destruction of the planet. With Superman around, it was the safest and most dangerous place in the galaxy. Even Hydra, the most dedicated evil in the Marvel Universe, had chosen the unforeseen path of if you can't beat it, join it. As for the rest of the guys, it was better for them to wash up and go to bed early, like good little kids. Is that why I feel bored? Luke silently sighed in his mind. When all stories become dull, day in and day out. When New York citizens no longer have to worry about the arrival of aliens and appearances of supervillains. After Superman's existence, and in the end, the significance of superheroes' existence became less important than it once was. Perhaps it was time for it all to end. Master Hamir, I'll leave this drunken girl in your hands. Ask her to come to New York to meet up when she wakes up. Luke left Captain Marvel at Comatage. He didn't want to delay any longer. It's time to give those friends he hadn't seen in a long time a big surprise. No problem, I'll ask the attendant to come over and take good care of the lady. Master Hamir nodded in agreement. Recalling the past briefly, Luke took a deep breath and opened the transmission portal to S.H.I.E.L.D's headquarters. The magic sparkled as he slowly stepped in. Unsurprisingly, no one moved into his office. All the furnishings and furniture were in pristine condition and spotlessly clean, so they must have been cleaned regularly. Luke sat in the spacious chair, turned back the chair and looked out of the window. What he saw was the Potomac River, the man-made lake in Constitution Park, the Lincoln Memorial. After revisiting the feeling for a moment, the newly returned director of SHIELD pushed the door out. Perhaps it was the late afternoon, and it was time to get off work or the tight security system outside and inside. Luke didn't meet anyone, let alone a strict deterrent. He smoothly made it all the way over to Commander Peggy Carter's office. The light was still on. Luke didn't knock on the door and gently pushed it in. As he imagined, the heroic female commander was working at her desk. A few strands of blonde hair fell down, covering her smooth forehead. His footsteps were light, and he didn't disturb the other party. Who can't the most powerful being in the world approach silently? Even the best agent, the best killer, wouldn't be able to detect him. Peggy. Walking over to her desk, Luke called out in a whisper. With eyes full of tenderness, he looked at the other person, trying to see the surprise in those pretty eyes that were lifted. However, no. With just a moment of surprise, Peggy Carter pulled out the Walter PPK automatic pistol stuck under the table with the fastest speed. With a quick pull of the trigger, she fired 3 precise point-blank shots at Luke. 1 on the forehead, 2 on the chest. The high-speed bullet smashed into Luke's skin. The deflated bullet feebly to the floor, making a crisp sound. Damn, Skrulls. Don't pretend to be him. Peggy glared, furious. Her body retreated while also emptying the bullets in the pistol, all at once. Peggy, how can I prove that I'm me? Luke looked startled and quickly understood what had happened. He was helpless. Those scrolls ruined the surprise he deliberately created. It wasn't a warm hug nor a passionate kiss that greeted the returning Superman. Instead, it was a cold 7.65 caliber bullet that didn't even graze his skin, and he couldn't even feel it. Comment. 16 comments. Vote. Chapter 528, Chapter 525 Prove Yourself, Press Conference. It wasn't easy to prove that he was himself. The Skrulls not only could change their appearance at will, but their disguises couldn't be distinguished from the real thing. Moreover, some of their elites could also copy the memories of their chosen target to achieve a flawless identity. But, at the moment the Skrulls died, their identities would be revealed. Otherwise, with modern means such as fingerprints, irises and DNA, it was difficult to verify their identities. In the secret invasion in the comic book event, everyone suffered a big loss, getting caught up in an endless chain of suspicions. There was no guarantee that the friend and partner standing in front of them was really the original person. Distrust and suspicion could destroy the sense of trust built up by fighting side by side, completely dismantling the possibility of teamwork. What if the battle was at a critical moment, and someone backstabbed them? This idea deepened the rift between the Avengers and superheroes. It turned what should have been a concerted effort to fight a foreign enemy into pandemonium. Peggy. Luke wanted to say something private that only the two of them knew, but before he could speak, the commander of S.H.I.E.L.D. stepped on her high heels and sprinted at him. The automatic pistol with the empty clip slammed over and snapped against his chest like a toy without the slightest hint of lethality. It's just that when Luke glanced at the spike on the high heels, he had to evade. A chill ran down his spine. It wasn't for fear of injury but an instinctive fear of men. A woman's nails and high heels were known as the two main killing devices. Luke stepped back and leaned over to avoid the murderous Peggy. His right hand reached out and tightened around a slender waist full of explosive strength. The latter kept struggling, but any degree of resistance was meaningless against Superman's steel-like body. Even if she was injected with the strengthening agent formulated by the Infinity Formula, and her body quality and cellular aging rate were different from normal. I don't know how to explain it. Because the Skrulls could change their appearance, copy memories and even mimic abilities. Luke paused and seriously said, "But I think that's a question that can be left to your judgment. Follow your heart and trust your feelings." The man and woman, who were close to each other, looked at each other and subtle emotions were conveyed to each other through the windows of their hearts. Peggy's eyes drifted off, and her heart pounded hard as if something had struck. "Can you fly?" "Yes." "What about heat vision?" "That too." "Then our first time." "My office, when you were lying on that table." "I'm asking about the scene where we first met." "Ah, Brooklyn, the door of my house." "Brown military uniform with large breasts." Loosening his grip on a skeptical Peggy, Luke answered questions and demonstrated various abilities. The corners of the former's eyes twitched. His way of speaking was very much like that bastard of a man who left his job to go out on a trip. "And where did you go during the time you were away?" The commander of S.H.I.E.L.D. crossed her arms around her chest and asked in a cold voice. "I told you before I left that I had to go away on a trip." Luke smiled. He didn't deliberately hide anything. He told Peggy about the concepts of the single universe box and the multiverse world. As for the 5 creator gods of the universe, and the games of higher beings, the various stories that took place in the studio next door, were simply brushed aside. Somewhat beyond comprehension and perception, and the fact that not everyone could accept the fact that they were cartoon characters or movie characters as calmly as Deadpool. In a certain time and space, Professor Charles used his psychic ability to read Deadpool's mind, and then, the bald head shattered like an exploding watermelon. "Is it really you?" Peggy dropped her guard. As a good female agent, her sensibilities prevailed. "Of course. I said I wouldn't take too long, although on a human time scale, it does seem like a long time has passed. But anyway, I'm back." Luke was also helpless. Had Dr. Manhattan not interfered and banished himself to the Watchmen world, how could he have been delayed for so long? Have the Skrulls launched an offensive, making you this nervous? Peggy was already 80% convinced. Her tone was slightly more intimate, and she softly said, "There's a Skrull who's pretending to be Howard and has infiltrated SHIELD. We didn't notice it until some time ago." The commander of S.H.I.E.L.D. explained the recent events. As she was in the middle of her story, the office door was violently thrown open. Two young girls dressed as secretaries barged in, guns in both hands. Previously, she thought Luke was a Skrull pretending to be him, so Peggy quickly alerted the Sparrows under her command. On the surface, they were the clerical staff and civilians, but they were actually from the Red Room, the Leviathan's spy agency. Those qualified and excellent girls would be assigned to various departments of S.H.I.E.L.D. as spies and moles. "It's okay." Seeing the Sparrows coming in, Peggy waved her hand and subconsciously stood in front of Luke. But the latter's eyes slightly narrowed, and the blazing light showed no mercy, piercing through those two charming and lovely girls. The high temperature penetrated their chests and evaporated their blood, leaving a hideous hole. "You?" Peggy was shocked and turned to look at Luke. "Skrulls." Superman pointed to the two bodies that had fallen to the ground. Their bodies and faces had changed. Their skins turned pale green, and their ears turned pointy, revealing the fact that they were aliens, not humans. "They have most likely infiltrated every department of SHIELD and are ready to launch a shift, like a complete overthrow of the original management with the help of the White House, or other external forces, for the last comprehensive overthrow." Luke guessed. The words made Peggy's heart clench. It's just that a moment later, she took one look at Superman and dismissed that extra worry. "Now that you're back, the job of eradicating the Skrull will naturally be left to you, Mr. Director." The female commander of S.H.I.E.L.D. said so with a chuckle. For no apparent reason, she felt a wave of relief that she hadn't felt in a long time. There were responsibilities that once weighed on her shoulders and all sorts of burdensome things to do. With Luke's appearance, it all seemed to dissipate into thin air. "Let me think about it." Luke pondered for a moment. It would be too much trouble to find the group of Skrull Empire's advance troops hidden inside SHIELD and human society, one by one. He liked to do things efficiently, preferably in one go. "Let's have a press conference." A moment later, Luke said so. He was confident that when the Skrulls heard of Superman's return, they would surrender without a fight. In the galaxy, there were very few secrets to be kept. The conflict in Noah had already spread. Even if this group of Skrulls were behind on the news, they wouldn't be able to turn a blind eye to Superman's presence. "A press conference, okay, I'll take care of it." Peggy nodded, then casually asked, "Where were we? By the way, did you bring another woman back again?" The smile on Luke's lips slightly faltered, indicating his grief. "What do you mean by again?" He had always kept to himself and wasn't close to women. The few occasional breaches of principle were unavoidable. Comment. 16 comments. Vote. Chapter 529, Chapter 526 Single Universe, The Ultimate Goal. Peggy picked up the phone on her desk and called S.I.E.L.D.'s Public Relations. Getting them ready to write the script, contact the media, and organize a press conference. Right now, she couldn't trust anyone but Luke, who had proven his identity. The shape-shifting abilities of those Skrulls were just too much to defend against. Without Superman's presence, SHIELD would likely have suffered a violently turbulent power shuffle. As long as the key figures like Peggy Carter, Howard Stark, and Nick Fury were under control, the Skrulls could disguise themselves as them and copy their memories. Then SHIELD could be transformed into the Skrulls' tool without anyone knowing about it. What are you going to say at the press conference? Peggy put the phone down and curiously asked. Superman had been away from Earth for a long time. The reason for the announcement was that the Super Soldier's cell division speed was too fast, leading to vigorous life consumption and requiring a long period of cryohibernation. Although the Pentagon and the White House had suspicions, they were all held back by SHIELD. So far, most people think that their war hero, the Beacon of Light, was still lying asleep in cryohibernation. Even though the top leaders of the human world remained dubious, they didn't say anything. After all, Superman gradually lost his influence and voice, and remaining asleep was the only situation they would be happy to see. I'm back, Luke replied. That's it. Nothing more. Peggy opened her mouth, not knowing what to say. After so many years, Superman reappeared in the public eye to announce his return to the world. It should be a generous statement that touches people's hearts. Such an important occasion was solved in one sentence. It's enough, Luke lightly said. His name represented strength and power. His existence was a symbol of prestige and status. Unless the Skrulls were illiterate or thought they had something to rely on. Otherwise, after learning the news of Superman's return, the only thing for them to do should be to retreat in haste and leave the planet. Well, the incoming president will surely be feeling that he's got the worst luck since Truman's term, Peggy jokingly said. Superman left Earth during Truman's term. No one in power would like to have a big mountain weighing down on their heads. The slumbering hibernation of the world's third pole was a relief to both the Eastern and Western superpowers. One could only imagine the uproar Superman's return would cause. They're too short-sighted. They treat the little power they have in their hands like a treasure and think everyone wants to steal it. Luke grimaced. If he wanted to, he would have no problem forming a Superman-led powerhouse government to rule the world. But doing so was pointless. He was already at the pinnacle of this single universe. What he desired was to advance to the multiverse level. The 5 creator gods of the universe had given their promises as payment for Luke's illegal entry into the studio next door. Earth 1024, where Superman was located, Earth 91, where he became the Sorcerer Supreme, and even the cinematic universe, were handed over to Luke for him to own. That was to say, the whole universe belonged to him. A single planet Earth had no meaning. Although, there were times when the 5 creator gods of the universes broke the rules of the universe and lost. For example, Galactus, who has been reduced to a universe-level battle unit, would always be defeated. Or when a powerful character kicks in and needs backstory extras. The 5 gods are always the first ones to pass the auditions. But comic representations aside, Luke had to admit that they were indeed diverse bigwigs with some of the admin privileges. Carving out 3 single universes for him wasn't a big deal for them. "It looks like you have big plans again," Peggy replied. Although they had an intimate relationship of sharing a bed and in-depth communication. But sometimes, she still didn't know what Luke was thinking. Every step taken by this man, known as the most powerful man on the planet, were all thought out, with something planned. However, outsiders wouldn't understand. Yes, it's a grand plan to jump out of the pond and into the infinite ocean. Luke was happy to share the joy with Peggy. By getting 3 single universes, he was able to try to build a huge multiverse system. At that time, he wouldn't have to be disturbed by the cosmic entity, living tribunal. Those guys who have been acting as backstreet extras all year round were trying to turn him into their hired muscle and do their work for them. But all Luke wanted was to get startup money and then start his own business. Even if he didn't know what the 5 gods of creation and the higher administrator behind them were trying to do. But the chaos was a ladder. If the 2 sides fought, it would undoubtedly be a good thing for Superman. "How long will it take for the press conference to start?" Luke asked casually as he leaned back into the sofa. "About 40 minutes or so." Peggy made several consecutive calls afterwards, inviting numerous influential TV stations. She didn't reveal the heavy news of Superman's return, only that something extremely amazing had happened, and a live announcement had to be made for North America. Luke raised an eyebrow and hooked his finger for Peggy to come over. He wrapped his arm around the woman's waist. He buried his head on her soft chest, took a deep breath and said, "It's been hard on you all these years." Before leaving, Luke injected Melina with the Infinity Formula strengthening solution before entrusting her to the Sorcerer Supreme. The reason for this arrangement was, on the one hand, the Ancient One once inadvertently mentioned that girls from Sicily had good magical qualifications. On the other hand, among all of Luke's women, only Melina was so soft that he needed to worry about her. If the Ancient One were looking after her, then Superman would be much more at ease. Therefore, Marlena went with the Sorcerer Supreme and became a female master of the mystic arts. But Peggy needed to take over S.H.I.E.L.D, and she couldn't just walk away or live her life with peace of mind. It wasn't easy for anyone to shoulder such heavy work and persist for so many years. "I almost forgot, apart from the small flaw of being extremely irresponsible, you're a perfect lover, director." Peggy's eyes softened, but her words didn't relax. "Back then, I was just too young and fell for your affectionate words." Luke raised his face and acted surprised. "What sweet words? I always thought that you appreciated my skills and were overwhelmed by my..." A fist hit him in the chest. Peggy was slightly annoyed. The director put away his exaggerated smile. He released his arms and pulled her to the sofa. "It's daytime, and there are 2 dead Skrulls on the floor. Are you really in the mood? Besides, there's still 32 minutes left, is that enough?" Peggy wasn't surprised, and she wasn't shy or resistant. She knew Luke's personality all too well. In some ways, this war hero to outsiders, the beacon of light on the earth, was unquestionably insatiable and demanding. Frankly, the daytime and the office, plus the uniform play, were just pedantic. In the most ridiculous instance, Superman even took Peggy and Melina together. At an altitude of more than 18,000 meters in the air, the 3 had an exciting multiplayer game inside the Bioforce field. After hearing about that, the White Queen also expressed a little envy and privately yearned for what it was like to go up to the clouds at over 10,000 meters. "Where do you want to go?" With a black blazer, white shirt and an air of professionalism around Peggy, Luke was all serious when he said, "I just want to lie down for a while and rest." "If it's just resting, then your hand can let go, right?" Glancing down at the naughty hand that habitually climbed to her chest, Peggy also asked with a serious face. "At New York Harbor, Warehouse 1. Howard Stark swaggered out of his car and saw a familiar figure. "Did you take care of Nick Fury too?" he asked with a smile. Standing in front of him was a tall man with dark skin and a serious expression. Nick Fury, the field leader of S.H.I.E.L.D., and Superman's former driver. With the White House and the Pentagon under control, and 60% of SHIELD infiltrated. No matter how powerful Peggy Carter is, she won't be able to stop our plan." The Skrull, who looked like Nick Fury, was smiling. "That's good. Find a way to get the secret location of Superman's cryo chamber, in case someone forcibly wakes Luke Cavill up, and all hell breaks loose," Howard Stark lightly said. He still didn't know what happened in Noah. "I'll increase my infiltration efforts and then pry the information out of Peggy Carter's mouth." The Skrull nodded. He was the communications officer in the advance team, responsible for stringing together the various compatriots who had secretly invaded Earth. "By the way, there's a new message from the Empire, asking us to keep an eye on Earth's movements." The Skrull leader, disguised as Howard Stark, smiled. Apart from Superman, who was noteworthy, there were no other threats on this blue planet. "After we find Luke Cavill, we can brainwash him into a soldier loyal to the Empire," he said. Comment. 11 comments. Vote. Chapter 530, Chapter 527 Strategic Retreat, the Most Dangerous Place. In New York, at the Daily Bugle. "Don't you have anything new to publish?" The newspaper owner named J. Jonah Jameson slammed a pile of prepared news material on his desk in anger. The young man with the mean and venomous tongue had just recently inherited the small newspaper, which had been in operation since World War II, from his father. Unlike James Sr., who was amiable and gracious, James Jr. was quick-tempered, fond of sarcasm and unforgiving with his words. These days, almost all the staff of the Daily Bugle had been scolded by him. "Let's see, Tony Stark, a rich kid not long out of MIT, and you guys don't have anything else to report every day but his philandering or gossip." James yelled at the top of his lungs, "New Yorkers like to read gossip, but they are not interested in the wannabe life of a playboy with a reputation as a genius who's been nothing but a womanizer. If you want to dig, you should also focus on Howard Stark, like Stark's father and son, going to a nightclub together and fighting over some stripper. That's the kicker." The employee, shrinking his neck and enduring his boss's scolding, weakly cautioned, "Howard Stark is the chief scientific advisor of SHIELD, a sort of national public official. If anyone is spotted following him, we could be shot as spies." James's torrent of venomous words came to an abrupt halt as he scratched his head and digressed, "If Howard Stark doesn't work, then you guys dig up the mutant, the guy who's always on TV, the one called Charles, or the other one, the Metal King. The Magnet. Anyway, a mutant who can control metal. Magneto." The employee corrected him. "Whatever. If you can't, find some material, write a memoir about Superman's sleep, interview the retired Captain America or something." Because his father lived well, Tony Stark failed to inherit the family business and became a young rich second generation. Without the status of being at the helm of Stark Industries, the reputation of being a genius alone was far from enough to attract the attention of the public. Therefore, in the eyes of the Daily Bugle, he was less interesting. In the original timeline, Tony Stark was a newspaper darling who kept half of New York's paparazzi fed on his own. "Boss, I got a message." The female secretary, holding a mobile phone, came in. "My best friend's boyfriend, whose ex-girlfriend's uncle, works in the press office at SHIELD, told me that SHIELD has big news." James was overwhelmed by the complicated relations. He only caught the two keywords S.H.I.E.L.D. and big news. Unlike the SHIELD, which was controlled by the hard-boiled egg director, Luke didn't deliberately hide its presence. So, the public was aware of this complex institution behind the five major powers responsible for international crises. Find a way to get in. James clapped his hands excitedly. A small newspaper, such as the Daily Bugle, which had no big company backing them and official certification, naturally, wouldn't get an invitation letter. Spend as much as you like, and make sure you don't fall behind the rest of the media. When SHIELD was going to hold a press conference, the media flocked to the event like sharks sniffing the scent of blood. Some of the newspapers that weren't invited did everything they could to try to get into the venue. Even if only some photos were taken, the headlines in the next few days were guaranteed. Half an hour later, on the 22nd floor of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s building near the Potomac River, the auditorium was packed with journalists from various newspapers, piling up their long lens cannons and pointing them at the stage. "Isn't the speaker today Ms. Carter?" a reporter anxiously asked. As the current commander of SHIELD, Peggy normally served as a spokesperson. Originally, the latter had thought of giving this task to Howard, who loved the limelight. However, after several attempts, they found that this man, who was married and had a son and was entering middle age, loved to freestyle it every time. He made any press conference scene informal, like a stand-up comedy scene. Therefore, Peggy chose to go on her own, and Howard was forbidden to touch the microphone ever again. What could the news be? "I remember they made such a big fuss a few years ago because the mutants caused a big scene in the Middle East," another reporter guessed. As SHIELD was positioned as an international organization, it didn't specifically follow the orders of any one country. Some years ago, the Ten Rings was making a lot of noise in that part of the Middle East. They contacted Emma, White Queen, and got the approval. SHIELD sent Magneto, and his Brotherhood, into that chaotic area. Then along came a guy claiming to be the Mandarin, who was the mastermind behind the Ten Rings. The young Magneto and his opponent fought to a standstill, exchanging blows. In the end, S.P.E.R stepped in and brought the Mandarin back to China. But the impact of that incident was so great that it led to pressure from the public. SHIELD made a point of stepping in to explain and promote Magneto as the leading figure of the younger generation of mutants. 2 minutes to go. Natasha, who had wavy burgundy hair, tried out the microphone and checked the rest of the equipment before speaking to the media on stage. The latter had their cameras turned on and pens and pocketbooks at the ready. 2 minutes later, a tall figure emerged from backstage. Before he spoke, the audience was in an uproar. The flashing lights, the sound of the shutters being pressed, the dumbfounded expressions of those reporters, all testify to the significance of what this man represented. Because of his appearance, the whole world would dramatically change again. On the other side, the Skrulls' secret base. They gathered in the darkroom in their human appearances. There were politicians, businessmen and even senior agents of SHIELD. SHIELD had a press conference earlier. Any news back from the scene? The Skrull leader, who had just met Nick Fury, walked into the room. Just a few minutes ago, I received word that 2 of my people had disappeared into thin air. Most likely because Peggy Carter had noticed something was wrong and wanted to go public with the information about us. A Skrull, who was wearing the appearance of a senator, sneered and said, "That would only make people think she was crazy." When everyone denies the truth will turn into a lie. The Empire's advance troops, adept in infiltration, reconnaissance and creating confusion, knew this routine all too well. They had waged massive wars on no less than 20 planets, bringing one race and civilization after another to their doom. Earth was the next target. "There's news coming back." A Skrull, who was pretending to be a White House aide, said so. He clicked on the projection apparatus in his hand and relayed the live press conference. "I am Superman." The tall man standing on stage spoke in a gentle tone. He wore the battle suit, the dark red cloak, with the young face that had appeared countless times in documentaries and campaign videos. The reporters below the stage were stunned. Now that's real news. Superman returns. Superman had opened his eyes from a deep sleep, got out of the cryo chamber, and came back to the human world. The Skrulls in the room were gaping at the mouth, too. They hadn't been told anything about it at all. When did Peggy Carter, who was clearly under 24-hour surveillance, wake Superman up? How could they not know about such a big thing when they even had Nick Fury under their control? What should we do now? The members of the Empire's advance troops all looked towards Howard Stark, their leader. How about considering a strategic retreat? Waiting to figure out Superman's true capabilities and then fight back? Someone suggested. If Superman were really as powerful as those documentaries and videos suggested, then it wouldn't be possible for the advanced forces to deal with him on their own. We are all elites of the Empire. Why do we need to be afraid of a single Earthling? Some people disagreed. The Skrull leader was silent as he raised his right hand and typed the word Superman into his wristwatch to get more information. Then, for an instant, all kinds of news from the galaxy popped out. A few minutes later, after browsing, the leader of the Skrulls wiped his cold sweat and made a decision. Retreat quickly, and let those inside SHIELD find a way to escape and don't engage in any risky moves. The rest of the Skrull members were dumbfounded. Was it necessary to be so quick and decisive? Even the faction that advocated surrender was considering withdrawing its forces to wait and see for a few days. Running straight away was too shameful. This planet is terrifying. We have to retreat, there is no time to lose. The Skrull leader shivered as he remembered the description of Superman's combat capabilities. If all that was true, then Earth might very well be considered one of the most dangerous places in the galaxy right now. Comment. 17 comments. Vote. Chapter 531, Chapter 528 Planet. Glass marble. Superman's return, like a bombshell that crashed into the calm lake, caused huge waves. The darkness of the world's landscape seemed to have been slightly altered by the presence of that man. Of course, Luke himself had no personal feelings about it. He only said a sentence at the press conference and then handed the scene to Peggy. Those reporters were so busy pressing the shutters that they didn't even have time to ask serious questions. News traveled fast in the modern world. 10 minutes later, the White House and the Pentagon were taking turns calling. Whether the president or the generals. Their words were polite, and their attitudes were sincere. Most of the conversation was about inviting Superman to Washington, D.C., or to attend a party. Such politically charged conversations were usually uninformative. Luke exchanged a few casual greetings and then handed over the itinerary for the next few days to Natasha, the head of S.H.I.E.L.D's administration department. The mayor of New York would like to invite you to give a speech in Brooklyn. What do you think, director? This pretty girl with burgundy hair looked much more mature than when she was in the Soviet Union and in Leviathan. The top brass core of SHIELD had basically been injected with the Infinity Formula's enhancing elixir to slow down cellular aging and maintain youthful vitality. Even though Luke left this world for a long time, Peggy and Natasha didn't change much. But the passage of time always gave women a more graceful and elegant charm. No time and no interest. Superman was back at S.H.I.E.L.'s headquarters building. He shook his head in refusal. Right now, he just wanted to have a good rest and take a long vacation. In the past, when his business was still in its infancy, he couldn't escape politics and the circle of power, so he could only get involved. But today was different from the past. S.H.I.E.L.D was on the right track and was gaining momentum. The image of power portrayed by Superman had become the common perception of those at the top of the pyramid in the human world. Luke didn't need to deal with any dignitaries, let alone keep his schedule full, juggling various high-end receptions and interpersonal relationships. He was perfectly capable of shifting from the forefront to behind the scenes, watching where the world, which he had changed beyond recognition, would go. From now on, you can just push back on these kinds of invitations without having to come and ask me again. Luke knocked on the table and lightly said so. Confirming that Natasha had nothing else, he simply closed his eyes and magnified his senses on his single multiverse. The Black Widow, sitting opposite, felt a powerful wave-like substance sweep over her like a radar wave. Because she was so close, she could see with her own eyes the distortion in the air, as if it was constantly vibrating, sending out light and strange colors. Witnessing this scene, Natasha subconsciously held her breath, not daring to make any movements. Relax, it won't hurt you. Luke spoke out in reassurance. He was gradually covering the planet under his feet with his senses. No matter what those Skrulls would choose to do, it was an indisputable fact that they secretly kidnapped Howard and Nick Fury with the intention of destroying SHIELD. For the purpose of setting an example to scare others, Luke definitely had to show a stern attitude. As for the consequences of offending the Skrull Empire, sorry. That was out of his consideration. Superman's senses expanded rapidly. His whole being seemed to ascend to great heights, opening up a godlike perspective. Earth was like an azure glass marble placed in the palm of his hand. Westchester County, Mutant Academy. The now young man Charles stood at the podium, giving a history lesson to the fifth graders in a kind and gentle tone. Unlike his friend Eric's choice, he didn't enter SHIELD. Instead, he stayed at the academy, a school that held great meaning for mutants, as a teacher. This was because the White Queen, Emma, and Superman had worked together long before they made it to the stage. The Mutant Registration Act was introduced and dramatically reversed the general perception of mutants. The climate of public opinion at this time was much better than before. Even William Stryker, the mutant butcher in the original plot, sent his son to the academy. As someone said, the plot of the world was messed up, he couldn't see the original appearance anymore. Thus, Professor Charles and Magneto, the best of friends, were supposed to be deadly rivals. Not only did they not go their separate ways, but they became youth leaders for their fellow compatriots. The original mutants date back to. Charles propped his hands on the table, and his voice suddenly paused. He looked up with eyes full of shock. Through the window, he looked towards faraway Washington, D.C. As an Alpha-class mutant, Charles had the most powerful psychic ability in the world. If he was willing, he could even enter the consciousness of every human being, all over the world, with the help of the Cerebro, developed by Hank, the Beast. As Luke sat in his headquarters building at the Potomac River, he let go of his sense of awareness and searched for every Skrull on the planet. Charles, who was in Westchester County, north of New York, was naturally aware of it. Habitually, he tried to catch the mental traces of it, trying to find out who the person was. But the mind wave, which was truly powerful, repelled Charles without mercy. In the next second, he screamed. He covered his eyes with his hands as if his retinas had been burned when he directly looked at the sun. It was far beyond his imagination. More powerful than the legendary Omega-class mutants. Class dismissed. Charles hastily spoke, turned and rushed out the door to find the Madam Principal to explain the situation. The Skrull contact officer disguised as Nick Fury sent a message to his fellow infiltrators in SHIELD. He had already been informed of Superman's horrifying presence from the leader's mouth. All the news that seemed exaggerated was all true. Then, not to mention an advanced unit, even if the Empire threw all its forces at him, it probably wouldn't be able to do much damage to him. After all, that was the man who easily defeated the gladiator whom the elders of the universe had to treat with respect. Superman's fame within the galaxy had surpassed Odin, the former master of the Nine Realms, and was vaguely on track to catch up with the Mad Titan. Using stealth technology, the ship docked in outer space is ready to make the jump at any time. After contact, this Skrull had returned to his original appearance. He didn't like to dress up as the dark-skinned hard-boiled egg. What should we do with those humans we have under our control? The officer asked. Only he and the leader of the Skrull's advance unit were left in the darkroom. Throw them in the warehouse. They'll come to their senses sooner or later anyway, and they'll just figure it out for themselves. The leader didn't kill those people, nor did he extort information by torture. There was a simple reason. Not out of some cosmic humanitarianism or something else. It was because the Skrulls didn't need to do that. When they captured their targets, they could control and copy their appearance and memory. Is Superman already aware of our presence? The contact officer was a little nervous. The laws of survival in the vast galaxy had always been close to the laws of the jungle, where the strong eat the weak. The civilization was a fake, take off that cover, and the interior was nothing but naked savagery. The Mad Titan and the Black Order under his command had become a major problem for the three empires. And now the equally powerful Superman was about to take the blue planet to the top. Once the other party knew that the Skrull Empire had struck Earth, would it lead to an outbreak of war? What could he do if he knows? The leader seemed to regain his composure. The Skrull's ability to shapeshift didn't stop at the surface but mimics on a genetic level. Unless Superman could see the distribution and movement of each atom, penetrate into the microscopic world and see the variations in it, how could he tell who was human and who was Skrull? Therefore, in the leader's view, the best situation was for everyone to take a step back. They were forced by Superman's power to withdraw from the planet. And the other party could only turn a blind eye to it as if nothing had happened. The idea of the Skrull leader was beautiful, but the reality was cruel. Boom! The darkroom seemed to be lifted by an invisible hand. Light came in. This was an air defense base buried deep underground. The leader of the Skrulls borrowed Howard Stark's power and funds to build a private base. But that invisible force, like the palm of God's hand pressing down. The thick soil and hard reinforced concrete were all crushed. Found you. A magnificent, spirit-shaking sound blasted directly into the Skrull leader's consciousness. His expression of panic suddenly solidified. As if his soul had been drained, he fell to his knees, trembling. Meanwhile, the Skrulls, scattered all over the area, were struck by lightning. They clutched their heads, stubbornly resisting the invisible psychic wave. But no one could persist for more than a second, and then they all lost consciousness. Director. In the office of the headquarters building, Natasha cautiously called out. Luke leaned into his chair, with his eyes closed, as if he was resting. She had been motionless and sat stiffly for 5 minutes. It was a little too much to bear, and that's when her voice came out. Okay, get security to throw those Skrulls under the building in jail for a proper interrogation when Peggy gets back. Luke opened his eyes and gently snapped his fingers. Outside the headquarters building, magical sparks flicker incessantly, pulling open numerous teleportation portals. The Skrulls, who lost their resistance and passed out, fell to the green lawn like heavy sandbags. Skrulls. Natasha, alarmed, went to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked over. Director, how did you find them? The female secretary, who graduated from Leviathan and won the title of Black Widow, covered her mouth. She had just heard from Peggy that the Skrulls were quite cunning and hard to distinguish. But Luke was just sitting in his office, and these guys were delivered to his doorstep. It was unbelievable. When you can put a planet in the palm of your hand and play with it as you please, doing anything you want to do or finding anyone would be easy. Luke smiled and slightly leaned back. With the secret invasion of the Skrulls out of the way, it was time for a vacation. Comment. 16 comments. Vote. Chapter 532, Chapter 529 New Age, A Bolt of Lightning. On another Halloween. The streets of New York were full of people dressed in strange clothes. Some were wearing Spider-Man tights, and some were carrying plastic props hammers, pretending to be Thor. Some used LED lights and made their own DIY Iron Man battle suits. Some dyed their hair green, presumably a guest appearance by the Hulk. But most of them were still wearing dark red cloaks. Whether it was a child or an adult. From a distance, it surprisingly converged into a sea of people shimmering with dots of red. In near-Earth orbit, S.H.I.E.L.'s headquarters was hovering in outer space, like the Eye of Horus looking down on Earth. Today, Iron Man Tony Stark was on duty. He made some mistakes that almost led to the destruction of the Avengers group. Finally, his father stood up and wiped his ass and took care of the strong artificial intelligence, Ultron, that his son and Hank Pym had come up with. Humph, that was just a mistake. Tony had his legs up on the table at the satellite headquarters called Skynet. As early as 5 years ago, S.H.I.E.L.D moved from the Potomac River to outer space. It was his father, Howard Stark, who was in charge of this project. Mr. Stark, Ultron has caused over hundreds of billions of dollars in economic damage worldwide and brought about resentment and accusations from various countries against the Avengers. J.R.V.I.S said in its British accent. You should be considerate of your boss sometimes. Tony slammed his drained glass of Coke into the robotic arm that he was operating and helplessly said, "It's Halloween, and I had already thought of a brilliant party theme. I would get those Victoria's Secret models and Playboy cover girls to dress up as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and the princess's stepmother." J.R.V.I.S, who was built into the computer system of the satellite headquarters, was silent for a moment, then said, "Mr. Stark, I'll have to remind you that if you're going to play the role of king, then the story between you and Snow White is, to some extent, terrible. It would be despised by the world." Tony rolled his eyes. Jarvis was a bit too serious, as old-fashioned as Captain America. He just wanted to liven up the atmosphere and say some playful remarks. Although, there was only one person in the satellite headquarters tonight. With a +1, at most. The Avengers had gone home for the holidays. Barton had a wife and children. Scott, the second-generation Ant-Man, had a cute daughter. And Banner, the nerd, had a beautiful girlfriend. Even Thor, the muscle-filled god of thunder, had found a companion, a female astronomer named Jane Foster. After all this while, I'm the only one alone. Tony munched on a somewhat cold Big Mac burger, feeling angry. He was the one who spent money like water, had cool cars, and could date any girl he wanted. However, during the holidays, everyone else was partying and enjoying family time, while he was left alone at the satellite headquarters. Di. The sound of an urgent alarm woke Tony up. He suddenly sat up straight and raised his hand to pull up a projected map. Let me see. It's California. What's happening? Tony rubbed his hands. On this lonely Halloween night, it wouldn't be a bad thing if a couple of unsuspecting guys helped him pass the time. SHIELD launched Project Insight a long time ago, which greatly reduced the number of crimes involving superpowered people around the world. Coupled with the popularity of superhero culture, all kinds of self-appointed heroes and mutants were springing up, competing to appear and become vigilantes. Of course, to carry out justice, they must come to SHIELD in person and register. Then, the individual's ability and the city they lived in would be considered to distribute their areas. His father, Howard, learned a new word from one of his friends that sums up the job quite graphically. Watchman. In short, to borrow a phrase from Time magazine, it's the era of the superhumans. Every day, new masked vigilantes appeared, and new supervillains were born. Locate the position. Jarvis, we've got work to do. Tony pressed the arc reactor on his chest, and the Mark 50 nano armor instantly covered his whole body. It was the most radical change and innovation he had ever made to the iron battlesuit his father had developed. And, of course, his most satisfying work to date. Standing up on the circular passage of the phase teleportation, Tony shouted out in a very Chunibyo way. Avengers, roll out. In the next moment, Iron Man disappeared and was directly dropped somewhere in California. Like the Eye of Horus, Skynet's satellite headquarters silently overlooked the blue planet below. A new era had arrived. Older people, who were once active on stage, were gradually retreating to the background. I mean, isn't it weird to be a superhero and then go and dress up in odd costumes and play other characters? Luke, dressed in a handmade tailored suit and with his hair slicked back, chuckled lightly. He stood in the hall where friends from yesteryear had come for the costume party. Steve wrapped his entire arm in tinfoil and dressed up as the Winter Soldier. Bucky, on the other hand, was holding up the genuine vibranium shield and donning the Stars and Stripes uniform as Captain America. They live up to their reputation as a couple of besties, even cosplaying as each other. Emma was dressed as a Disney princess, and Peggy was wearing a red dress and cloak, which was obviously Little Red Riding Hood. Melina dyed her hair blonde and paired it with high heels and a white backless dress, a perfect Marilyn Monroe. On top of that, there was Natasha's version of Cleopatra, and not to mention Nick Fury getting creative with a bullet wound to the head, claiming to play a gangster from some Quentin Tarantino movie. These familiar faces aside, the hall was also filled with Namor, Black Queen Selene, Professor Charles and Magneto, the mutant youth leaders, Selene, the Vampire Queen, and so on. They were either the people who ruled the Seven Seas, the top brass of the Magic Congress, representatives of the mutant camp, or those in control of the underworld. They weren't just gathered together to participate in a party. Rather, it was because of someone who had been missing from the scene for decades. You're dressed so normally. What are you playing as? Howard Stark, who turned himself into a Star Wars Jedi, leaned in and asked. He and a few others were the only ones in the room who dared to speak to Superman in such a relaxed tone. James Bond, I'm one glass of martini short. Please get it for me. Luke slightly chuckled and ordered Howard. So, let me count, 1, 2, 3, 6, 7. Boy, how many Bond girls do you need? Howard smoothly took a glass of martini with olives from the waiter's tray. That's a difficult question for me to answer. The corners of Luke's mouth hooked up. Only Howard could talk about such topics with him. That guy Steve was too honest, and his eyes were only on Bucky. He would never talk about such things. I forgot, there are 3 universes now. Earth 1 has Peggy and the gang, who's on Earth 2? That hellish limbo queen called Magic. And what about Earth -3? It can't be that pajama-wearing spider kids aren't, can it? That would be so exciting. Despite being married, Howard still talked about women with a great deal of gusto. This was probably due to the fact that a leopard couldn't change its spots. You really have a perverted mind. I'm not a stallion in heat. Luke felt speechless and explained, and, how good are you yourself? Running off to Earth 3 to spoil your granddaughter every day. At this age, if you really want to be a grandfather, then tell Tony to hurry up and have one. Howard was depressed. He remained in a middle-aged state through the infinity formula. But mentally, he was already an old man. Don't even mention it. That little bastard only knows how to hook up with female stars and sleep with models everywhere. He's nothing like me. Howard was a bit exasperated. He would have liked his son to get married quickly and get a grandson or granddaughter for him to spoil them. Weren't you like that when you were young? The pursuit of beauty runs in the Stark family. Luke teased. After he returned to Earth, he slowly handed over the work in S.H.I.E.L.D. to Nick Fury, freeing Peggy too. The so-called long vacation was the reward paid by the 5 creation gods of the universe, along with the 3 singular universes becoming his personal multiverse. For a long time, Luke had been shuttling back and forth between different worlds. Once in a while, he would go to Comatage to continue Stephen Strange's training, pushing him further into the path of the One-Punch Mystic Master. Once in a while, he would go to the movie universe and have some hot pot with Chubby Thor and Rocket Raccoon. All in all, life was beautiful and peaceful. Now, Luke entertained the friends and subordinates at the party while chatting with his old friends. As the night drew to a close, Nick Fury was debriefing his former boss when he heard a beep from his communicator. He picked it up and found that it was a message from Iron Man. "What happened, Stark?" With an apologetic face, Fury went to the balcony and contacted Tony with his communicator. According to Iron Man's cocky and brash character, he couldn't have contacted him for no reason. "I found a strange guy in California. He's fast." Iron Man's voice sounded from the communicator, urgent and shocked. "It's gone supersonic. God, he's going faster. I can't catch him. I've lost him. Fast. Then you should get Charles Xavier and tell him to send Quicksilver after him." Nick Fury was a little bemused by the fact that it wasn't like SHIELD didn't have any superpowered people with extreme speed. "Well, I'm afraid it's not that easy. I'll pull Quicksilver in." The communicator's channel was soon joined by one more person. "Mr. Stark, that guy's speed, it may be a bit frustrating to say so, but I really can't catch up with him." Quicksilver, whose real name was Pietro Maximoff, spoke in dismay. "Get J.R.V.I.S to track him by satellite." "What does the guy look like?" Nick Fury's face sank. "A speedster that even Quicksilver couldn't keep up with." Apparently, this was a new emerging superpower. "I didn't see it clearly. He ran too fast, like a yellow bolt of lightning." Amidst the rustling murmur came Quicksilver's reply. "Wait. He's slowing down like he's running out of steam." Comment. 19 comments. Vote. Chapter 533, Chapter 530 The Flash. I visited the studio to find someone. Name: Barry Allen. Age: 25. Gender: ha. Isn't it obvious enough? Cut the crap. Be honest, and we might let you go. Lie to us, and you're done. The young agent in the interrogation room slapped the table and spoke in a stern voice. SHIELD will not wrong a good man or spare a bad man. Tell the truth. Well, male. Where are you from? What is your objective? We will conduct a psychiatric test on you later to confirm whether you have antisocial and anti-human tendencies. I don't, sir. A weak voice came from the darkness. I just run a little faster, but I'm not a bad person. The young agent sneered and whispered in a deep voice, every guy who walks in here says the same thing. Answer the question properly. I'm from Midtown. Came here to find someone. The low voice replied. Looking for someone. Looking for who? The young agent stopped taking notes. He looked up and asked. However, there was a long silence on the opposite side. In the darkroom, only a table lamp was lit on the table. The agent shone a light on the other party, illuminating the face that was being interrogated. With his messy blonde hair and pretty blue eyes, he looked like the typical boy next door, giving him a friendly impression. The young agent wasn't fooled by looks. These days the villains all looked like good guys, and the good guys looked like villains. In the words of director Nick Fury, the current trend was refined scum, and the devil is a gentleman. You should all have heard of him. His name is Luke Cavill. Luke said he's famous here and is a super idol. The young man who called himself Barry Allen organized his words and said so. He was confined to a metal chair, and his hands and feet were shackled. With difficulty, he moved his body and changed to a slightly more comfortable position. As a member of the Justice League and a superhero in Midtown, This was Barry's first time experiencing interrogation and being treated as a criminal. "What did you say?" The young agent sitting across the table suddenly paled when he heard the reply. "You seem to be hard of hearing, sir." Barry repeated it very carefully and said, "Luke is a good man, and we have fought side by side together to stop the havoc in Flashpoint." Caught off guard, the young agent didn't know what to do when he heard Superman's name. A few seconds later, he heard Director Fury's deep voice in his earpiece. "Don't bother with the trial for now. Seal the papers and delete the digital data." The young agent nodded, packed his things and stood up. He went around Barry's back and cleanly injected a powerful anesthetic into his neck. While outside the interrogation room, the surveillance room on the 15th floor, Nick Fury's face didn't change, but his expression looked a bit gloomy. "Luke Cavill. That's Superman's name. Those who are now qualified, or dare to call him that. Except for veterans like Ms. Carter, Captain America, and Howard Stark. There was no one else. Everyone would more or less add a respectful prefix. For example, General, Director, Master, and so on. If this has something to do with Superman, I have to report to Ms. Carter." Nick Fury narrowed his eyes. Thankfully, Captain Marvel was brought back to Earth without leading to subsequent twists and turns. The Flarkin beast that looked like a cat but was actually very dangerous had become Luke's pet, allowing Fury to escape the horrible wound on his face. Would it seem too incompetent of SHIELD to alarm him with this little matter? Inside the surveillance room, the brush-faced Garrett coughed. He sat next to Nick Fury, talking casually, looking relaxed. "Hiding this is the real incompetence," the director said with a heavy tone. Together with Garrett, he was part of the Zodiac team, assigned to missions around the world. In a sense, the two were old comrades in arms. With such mutual affection, naturally, there was no need to deliberately observe the hierarchy's rules. "I am worried he has stepped back from the stage a long time ago and given us authority over SHIELD as well." Garrett rubbed his chin, feeling the stubbly beard. "Perhaps, he doesn't want us to disturb his quiet life." Nick Fury didn't say anything. He just got back from Superman's party. Over the years, that godlike man seemed to have retreated behind the scenes and generously delegated power, but in fact, he had turned his attention to a wider place. Parallel universes. Nick Fury's eyes flickered for a moment as the phrase came to mind. He was in a high position and was qualified to know these hidden secrets. "You know, Garrett, no one has escaped our notice since SHIELD executed Project Insight." Nick Fury looked serious and earnestly said, "But, I did a worldwide, high-clearance search for the name Barry Allen within the database earlier. I didn't get any results. It's like he never existed." Garrett's expression slightly changed, realizing that something was wrong. Human beings couldn't be apparitions. If they have existed and lived, they were bound to leave traces. It seems that something big is about to happen. Garrett couldn't resist pulling out a cigarette, not lighting it, just sniffing the scent. There was a bit of excitement in his eyes. The world had been quiet for far too long, and a lot of people were feeling a little bored. Barry Allen. Luke raised an eyebrow. His party was over. After catching up for a while, his old friends had all left. He leaned back in his deck chair and gazed at the wonderful view of the pool while chatting with Peggy. Nick Fury wasn't qualified to talk directly to Superman yet. The information he reported was generally relayed by former director Peggy Carter. The Flash came to my world. Luke wasn't too surprised. Instead, the corners of his mouth hooked up, revealing a faint smile. Your vacation is coming to an end, isn't it? Peggy asked, sitting on a deck chair, with one hand propping her chin up and her head tilted. She and Superman were close enough to communicate at a negative distance, more secretive than Nick Fury ever knew. Parallel universes, box theory, and the existence of another studio. It looks like it. The five gods, the living tribunal, they've all waited for too long. Luke stretched and lamented, me too. I've been idle for so long that I feel like my body is going to rust. That's the end of the vacation. Next up is the rippling, magnificent battle. Peggy curled her hair with her fingers. Her beautiful eyes blinked as she spat out siren-like seductive words. So tonight is the last night of the vacation. How about a full-on bash? Luke looked serious and asked, like what? Peggy had a smile on her face and looked at the women in the pool. A battle of sorts. Luke got excited and asked Barry to wait one night. He had more important things to do at the moment. Binge. This fanfic will end this week. Comment. 15 comments. Vote. Chapter 534, Chapter 531. 2 Studios, Cute Cat. The next day, Barry, like a criminal, was personally escorted by Nick Fury to Superman's mansion, a suburban manor in San Antonio. Following the humorless, stern-faced man into the courtyard, he saw a beautiful lady. Would you like some tea? Or soda? Luke is over at the pool. Peggy brushed her hair, glanced at a nervous and confused Barry, and smiled. Soda. The latter thought for a moment and replied. Pizza and Coca-Cola were his favorites. The extremely fast runner burned a terrifying amount of calories. In the beginning, Barry had to be injected with several large bags of glucose every day to supplement his diet. Get over there yourself. Nick Fury sat in the living room and pointed to the swimming pool. The glass door was pushed open, and the midday sun streamed in. Barry saw the figure on the deck chair, wearing swimming trunks, sunglasses, topless and with a glass of juice in his hand. Like a tourist on holiday in Hawaii, his lifestyle was laid back and relaxed. Which Barry are you? Luke asked aloud when he saw the Flash for the first time. He had dealt with more than just Barry Allen of the Flashpoint Paradox. And the Flash also existed in the second time branch that was later restarted. In that world, Luke was Superman's older cousin and Lex Luthor's godfather and thoroughly influenced the direction of the plot. Theoretically, the Flash of that branch would also know of his existence. How many of me do you know? Barry scratched his head and curiously asked. Superman's older cousin had too many secrets, just like Batman. As his teammate, it gave him a sense of security. But if he became an enemy, it would be a headache. Okay, you're probably Barry from Flashpoint. Luke took off his sunglasses and lazily said, if it were the Flash in another timeline, they would have tackled other doubts first. For example, which parallel world is this? Barry Allen, who had experienced the Flashpoint world, was probably the speedster who understood the parallel universe the most, apart from Wally West, Kid Flash. It can't be helped. Who made them both be the first to be sacrificed whenever a big event comes along. Like the Bat family, most of whom had lost both parents and had miserable lives. Or the Superman family, always facing a lot of problems and feeling lost as they grew up. Perhaps the point of the Flash family's existence was to create a switch that could be reset at any time for those beings located in the Omniverse, manipulating the destiny of the heroes. Before the outbreak of the crisis on Infinite Earths, the second-generation Flash Barry Allen was the key object of sacrifice. After that, the third-generation Flash Wally West took up the mantle. In comics such as 0 Hour, Rebirth and Metal, they die and come back to life, live and are sacrificed, and so on and so forth. The Flash family was full of loyalty. It's clear that this isn't even the multiverse I'm from. The Flash had a wry smile on his face. He looked at Luke and said, "I've lost the Speed Force and can't sense its energy, its force range, its presence, in the slightest." Speed Force was a magical force that belonged to the DC Universe, with Barry acting as a generator. He was very strongly connected to the walls of Speed Force, generating Speed Force with every step he took in his runs. At the very beginning, there was no way that white-haired guy could catch me, but the longer I ran, the slower I got, and my Speed Force was depleted from my body and wasn't getting replenished. This is a problem I've never encountered before. Barry's sober analysis led to deductions. Speed Force does come from outside the source wall, but regardless, it's tightly connected to me. There have been times when I've lost my lightning-like speed, but those were just tests. I've always been able to find it if I feel it with my heart. But now, the Speed Force has disappeared. Luke nodded his head. It seems that all members of the Justice League, as long as they were separated from Batman, would be able to regain their true IQ. He had already understood what had happened. Purely in terms of speed, Quicksilver was certainly no match for the Flash. But this was Marvel's studio. With Barry Allen away from home, without a constant stream of Speed Force, he would soon be drained and turned into a normal human being. In any case, that race across two studios yesterday. In the end, it was won by Quicksilver. You can understand this world as being similar to each other and yet very different, mirror universes. Luke stood up, stretched his muscles, hooked Barry's shoulders and chuckled, or, you can think of them as two comic book companies running the same business. Borrowing from each other for the sake of serialization, for sales, for buzz, is normal. So, there are superheroes like you, like Superman, like Batman. See that guy? He looks serious, like someone owed him money and didn't pay. He's the head agent of SHIELD, specializing in dealing with superhero groups, and has about as much status and usefulness as Amanda Waller of ARGUS. On top of that, the world has rich superheroes who are worth billions and can build high-tech battle armor, and some Norse god whose dad is Odin, and Luke, like a family accountant, pointed out the identity and backgrounds of the Avengers one by one. "Did you find anything, Barry?" The Flash was a little confused and almost got sidetracked by the various character connections spewing out of Luke's mouth. Quickly sorting through the complicated information, he finally realized something was wrong. "I see what you mean." Barry's smile was bitter, it was too similar. This time, he broke out of the source wall and arrived in a strange time and space that wasn't a parallel universe. Okay, the introduction of the world's background is done. Luke snapped his fingers and brought the topic back. Now it's my turn to ask the questions. How did you find me? To be more precise, how did you get here? The Flash was known to be able to reverse time and restart the universe by running on all cylinders. But when did he get the ability to pierce through the picture? Barry blinked. His eyes looked through the floor-to-ceiling window at Peggy, who was wearing an apron and had a family-like vibe. There was also Melina, who had just walked down the stairs. The other woman had an odd expression on her face. "What picture?" Luke subconsciously asked. Barry pulled out an old yellowed photograph with a slightly blurred picture. It was Luke and Wonder Woman. It was a picture of them together, in the Flashpoint world. "I won't tell Diana, assuming she doesn't pursue it." Barry gave his assurance with great integrity. Needless to say, he didn't expect Luke to be a playboy like Bruce. This was completely unlike Superman. For the most part, Clark's real girlfriend would only be Lois Lane. "Oh, you don't need to worry about that." Luke didn't believe a single punctuation mark in the Flash's promise. He and Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern, were the famous gossip kings of the Justice League. "It seems that you've found out about the guy who stole a decade of your universe and changed the origins of superheroes." Luke didn't care about that little problem. He took the picture and spoke with soft eyes. Logically, this should have been in Diana's possession. The Flash got it from somewhere and borrowed its special nature as an anchor point to run to the Marvel Universe. Barry Allen went to a lot of trouble to take a trip and make a cameo appearance. "That's right, Wally told me all about it. There's a terrible being trying to manipulate the Justice League and manipulate everything secretly." Barry's face was stony, not as relaxed as before. "His name is Dr. Manhattan." Luke was blunt, remembering that the Blue Man owed him a debt that he had yet to settle. "We can talk about the specifics on the way. Right now, I need you to run, Barry." "Run." The Flash closed his eyes and still didn't sense the speed force. Without that energy, how could he travel between studios? "Just run, and you're done," Luke lightly said. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. A pure white light enveloped them. Sitting in the living room, Nick Fury, holding his tea, watched wide-eyed as the two figures disappeared. "If I hadn't been prepared, I would have thought I'd had too much to drink," the director lamented. His task was done, and it was time for him to go back to SHIELD. He placed the cup down and saw a cute cat on the sofa. "Hey, come here, little one, let me pet you." Nick Fury was usually serious, but like most humans on Earth, he couldn't resist the charms of a fluffy cat. He also couldn't resist the urge to go over and tease Superman's cat a bit. Comment. 11 comments. Vote. Chapter 535, Chapter 532 Living Tribunal, on Mars. Luke didn't know that Fury, who had dodged a bullet, was still trying to reach out to the cute-looking beast. He snapped his fingers, and the pure white light came down. Almost in a split second, the two broke through one universe's box after another and came to the end of the multiverse. The experience was amazing, and Barry kept his eyes wide open as he peered down at the glistening bubbles from top to bottom. One by one, the worlds presented a splendid landscape that enchanted him. It was a very different feeling from breaking through the speed of light, creating a wormhole in space-time and traveling through. Just before the Flash came to his senses, the magnificent light beam with infinite power threw him somewhere else. "Hello, Barry Allen." The bald master, who looked very neutral, smilingly spoke to him. Barry looked around and found himself in a temple-like building. He scratched his head and asked, "Where's Luke?" "He has one more conversation that must take place before he travels to your world." The bald master of the mystic arts greeted the Flash and sat down, handing him a cup of hot tea with great enthusiasm. This was Kamataj from some unknown parallel world and the Ancient One from Earth 1024, looking out of the window. Silently, a great game spanning 2 multiverses was finally about to begin. I can't believe it's you. To be honest, I preferred Miss Death, or Mr. Eternity, or Uncle Galactus. Luke stood in the void, with the swirling galaxy at his feet. They're easier to deal with and more interesting to talk to. Appearing before Superman was a golden figure as large as a celestial body. As if spanning the multiverse, he was extremely large. Compared with those planets, they were like tiny grains of sand. A thunderous, majestic voice rumbled down. You are the one who started this game and should understand what to do. The golden silhouette that stood on top of the sky, as if it were a giant, had 3 faces, representing equity, necessity, and vengeance. He had a very impressive name, the Living Tribunal. He was the administrator of the multiverse beyond the 5 gods. Like other background beings, the Living Tribunal had high authority but very few appearances. You're going to teach me how to do things. Luke's eyes flickered as he said, neither the 5 creator gods nor you are adjudicators. At best, they are high-level participants. So, don't even think about pushing people around. During the long days of his relaxing vacation, he indulged in physical activities. Occasionally engage in multiplayer sports, theme parties. Incidentally, finish the pile of side quests and boost Superman's reputation points. Like reeling in Hydra and getting a Kryptonian ship. Toss around Howard Stark and S.H.I.E.L.D, in reverse engineering some new technology. Find Hyperion and Blue Marvel, the 2 Marvel Superman who he hadn't fought with. Had a friendly sparring session and got 2 chances to draw after beating them down. Silver Superman and Superboy Prime. The 2 powerful cards enabled Luke to break through from a single universe to the multiverse. That was why he was so calm and faced the 5 great beings and the Living Tribunal with the same calmness. Although most of the time, these multiversal bigwigs had always moved in the background and had their own share of dark histories. One of the worst was Galactus, which had been reduced to a cosmic-level battle machine. But as administrators under the Omniverse, they actually possessed quite a high level of authority and were the embodiment of the rules. A little more problematic to deal with than the Sentry, or the Gladiator, which could be solved with his fists. I'm just reminding, not warning. The Living Tribunal said in a hushed voice. What the collision of 2 multiverses will lead to is a future that none of us can foresee. It requires caution and deliberation. Luke curled his lips and didn't take the reminder of the Living Tribunal to heart. He had his own plans and ideas, and no one could force him to do anything. Maybe the Omniverse existence had sprouted a new idea, to have the superheroes of the 2 multiverses have the fight of the century, or maybe it's for some other reason. All in all, there would be an unprecedented link between the 2 studios. The 5 creator gods and Living Tribunal, the group of administrators of the multiverse, hoped that Luke could win more chips for their side or even win the game straight away. All the details have long been finalized, and I know what I should do. Luke waved his hand. He didn't like talking to insipid guys, and the Living Tribunal just happened to be the most boring being in the multiverse. The direction of this game does not depend on me. The 5 creator gods and the Living Tribunal allowed Luke to smuggle himself onto the studio next door, to gain more information and create a greater impact. But he didn't do that, or rather, didn't do what that group of multiverse administrators had in mind. Being from the Marvel Universe didn't mean he had to be an enemy of the other studio. He himself was Superman's older cousin and also had a great relationship with Wonder Woman. What's more, the big events that hadn't happened in the DC Universe, such as metal and the like, hold the opportunity to be ranked in the Omniverse. Luke wasn't exactly on the living tribunal's side for whatever reason. Wasn't being neutral a good thing? Superdemon, Devastator, Super Kryptonian, Cyborg Superman, Silver Superman, Superboy Prime. Luke's eyes flickered with emotions. With the blessing of many Superman cards, he had broken through the single universe level and became a singularity in the multiverse, enough to stand side by side with the living tribunal. But it was hard to go further than that. Even the Golden Superman, which was based on the five-dimensional world, was essentially just standing at the peak of the multiverse, not entering the Omniverse and stepping outside the framework of the plot. If anything, among the many Superman cards, the only one capable of being an Omniverse-level being was probably Cosmic Armor Superman, which was a collection of 52 Supermen in parallel universes combined into a single consciousness. Mandrak, the demon who devoured the parallel universes, called it second only to God. But Luke couldn't pin all his hopes on drawing the Cosmic Armor Superman's card. He saw this game as a great opportunity. If the two multiverses were to merge into one, would they be able to escape the fate of having their past and future written by the Omniverse and those beings? I'm in a hurry. Let's chat again next time. Luke pretended to look at his watch and disappeared from the living tribunal's sights. In the next moment, Barry, who was drinking tea. Let's go. Luke greeted the Ancient One with a snort. Sorcerer Supreme, let's have tea together again sometime. The Ancient One gently smiled, raised her cup and said, unfortunately, I can't go to another similar multiverse. When you come back, you have to tell me about things happening over there. Luke nodded, pulled Barry and disappeared from Comatage. They turned into swift streams of light that broke through the boundaries of the multiverse. The wall that was so huge that even the edges weren't visible to the naked eye still stood there. The 10th metal within erupted with radiant light, penetrating the barriers and interference of the power of the source. This is it. Barry opened his eyes and eased himself out of the unpleasant sensation, similar to motion sickness. Mars, the start of this journey. Luke replied. Binge. Don't forget to vote. New book and Infinite Earths resuming from Monday. Comment. 17 comments. Vote. Chapter 536, Chapter 533 Flashpoint Follow-up, Doomsday Clock. Mars. Barry subconsciously held his breath, but not only was he able to speak normally, but he also didn't feel suffocated by being in a vacuum environment. Don't stray too far from me. Luke opened the bioforce field and silently covered Mars in its entirety, creating an ecological environment suitable for human beings. Not to mention the cosmic vacuum, even if the star exploded, it wouldn't break his bioforce field. A multiverse-level existence can no longer be measured by common sense. Why here? Barry was confused. He thought that Luke would go to the Justice League first or to Superman to meet up with his cousin. After the Flashpoint crisis was resolved, the Justice League superheroes' origins and history were more or less altered. For example, Superman lost his parents and appeared in the public eye earlier. Wonder Woman didn't take part in the First World War and didn't leave Paradise Island until modern times. Even to the extent that some had been forgotten. The third-generation Flash, Wally West. Accurately speaking, he was the fastest person in the world. Barry Allen was even faster than the second-generation Flash. Wally West was one of the first to notice Dr. Manhattan, but his presence was rewritten by that blue man, causing all superheroes to forget about the existence of the third-generation Flash. Batman, Teen Titans, including Wally's wife, didn't even remember his name. Later on, only Barry remembered him. He remembered Wally and dragged the other party out of the Speed Force space. Then, the Flash, who learned that someone had tampered with the timeline in an attempt to manipulate the Justice League, naturally couldn't sit idly by. Barry went straight to Gotham, told Batman, and asked the other party to use that world's brightest brain to figure out what to do. After a few moments of deliberation, instead of making it public and calling a meeting of the members of the Justice League, they went back to the Flashpoint world that was about to collapse. Thomas Wayne and Bruce Wayne, the two generations of Batman from two worlds, had a father-son meeting and speculated on Dr. Manhattan's intentions. Aware of the seriousness of the problem, the Flash couldn't help but think of Superman's older cousin. If someone changed one heroic story after another through the occurrence of Flashpoint, was Luke's disappearance also caused by the other party? With that in mind, Barry quickly looked for Wonder Woman. Except for Batman, Wally, and himself, Diana was the one who was most likely to realize the problem. Because it was in that Flashpoint world, where they weren't supposed to be, that Wonder Woman and Superman's older cousin crossed paths too closely. Diana, who learned about it, told him a secret. She always felt that she had forgotten someone very important and crucial, who appeared in her dreams every so often, but she couldn't get close enough to see what he looked like. Finally, Wonder Woman handed Barry an old picture with a man on it. With the help of the remaining energy, the latter finally locked on Luke's position and traveled to the other studio. That was what happened after Flashpoint. The culprit that the Justice League is looking for is on Mars. Luke's eyes flashed. His sights quickly enveloped the whole planet and then said, "It's just that the superheroes seem to have picked up on it." Around 2 days ago, the legitimacy and rationality of the Justice League had been questioned by the world because of certain international disputes and malevolent events. Superman, once a man of perfect character and considered a beacon of light, had been attacked by public opinion and grievances. Faced with such a situation, as the brain of the Justice League, Batman's mind was on another matter. Who's running everything from the shadows? Tampering with the timeline? Is it Reverse Flash? No. Eobard Thawne is dead. There is no doubt about that. He died in the Batcave. Died in front of me. Bruce clearly remembered that there was a blue light that enveloped the Reverse Flash. Then, the speedster, the future man, the supercriminal, looked like he had discovered some shocking secret. Then, as if he had been erased, he turned into a wisp of smoke. Lex Luthor. Batman shook his head and denied the answer. That arrogant bald man hadn't appeared for a long time. He had no motive, much less reason to do so. Just playing hide-and-seek and cops and robbers with Superman was enough to meet all of Lex Luthor's urges. Batman thought of one villain after another and then denied it again and again. Who is it? He felt confused, but at the same time, he felt terrible. Batman had always hated the loss of control and the unknown, preferring only accurate answers and predictable developments. A day later, the Watchtower headquarters on the Moon. Martian Manhunter detected a strange energy wave on his home planet. After careful consideration, Batman decided to take his family members, Nightwing and Batgirl, to Mars. Joining this team were Amanda Waller's Suicide Squad and Supergirl. Measures were taken in response to the dangers that they may encounter. Batman incidentally brought in Constantine, Zatanna, and Swamp Thing, from Justice League Dark. And Hal Jordan and others in the Green Lantern Corps, like Guy Gardner, John Stewart, and so on. They were both Green Lanterns who, after Hal Jordan, were responsible for security in Sector 2814, the surrounding planetary area that encompassed Earth. All in all, the lineup was quite luxurious. In the Justice League, in addition to Superman, who stayed on Earth, there was Wonder Woman, who had a voice in the United Nations. Shazam, Aquaman and Cyborg all came together. Seal off the planet. When the spacecraft arrived on Mars, Batman took the lead. He wore a suit of pitch-black battle armor with life-sustaining equipment. His voice was deep. Several Green Lanterns followed instructions and held up their rings. The flashing green lights formed a huge shield, encasing the large Mars within. As far as the eye could see, it was all red terrain. A massive clock-like structure stood there. Any plans, Batman? The hordes of superheroes stepped down from the spaceship. Alert and careful, they stepped into the elaborate, impeccable, mechanical building. A blue man, covered in nothing but flesh, appeared. It's downright indecent. Constantine, who was following the group, glanced at Zatanna, who had averted her eyes and rightfully chastised. Although, he did have his usual share of debauchery, like getting high and having multi-person affairs and such. But even if he didn't have a bottom line, he wouldn't expose himself in public. Pervert. Hal, the Green Lantern, cursed. Kara, close your eyes. Martian Manhunter stood in front of Supergirl. Who are you? What's your name? Batman stepped forward and asked with a heavy tone. A keen intuition warned him that this blue man was dangerous. They're fighting against the fear of their own power. Dr. Manhattan didn't answer his question. What does that mean? Batman frowned. Sorry, I was talking to Bruce Wayne 6 minutes later. Dr. Manhattan turned his body and tilted his head. The superluminal particles are throwing my vision off a bit. Wouldn't it seem ridiculous for you to run to Mars, looking for answers to questions but not even understanding the questions themselves? Comment. 12 comments. Vote. Chapter 537, Chapter 534 Timeline, the final outcome. This guy isn't crazy, is he? Hal Jordan looked at Batman with a skeptical look on his face and asked. If there were any superheroes there who dealt with the most psychopaths, sociopaths and perverts, the Dark Knight from Gotham would take first place. It was a city devoid of sunny skies and full of sin. The Joker, the Penguin, the Riddler, the Black Mask, go out and throw a random brick in the air, and you can hit 3 or 4 villains. I'm not crazy. Dr. Manhattan replied. He looked around at the superheroes, but his eyes were in a trance, with no specific focus. A few minutes ago, the space-time of this universe seemed to be disturbed or affected in some way. The violent motion of the superluminal particles acted like a hazy gauze that obscured Dr. Manhattan's quantum perception. He couldn't see what was going to happen a few moments later, as if a film had been skipped, and he could only foresee the ending. I hope you'll explain yourself, your purpose, and why you are doing this. Batman stared at the blue man, trying to get useful information from the other party's expression. However, nothing was found. This guy doesn't even look like an intelligent creature, not even the slightest whiff of emotion. Batman's heart sank as he silently raised his opponent's danger level by a notch. Even a lunatic like the Joker, who couldn't be bothered with logic, would show some kind of obvious emotional tics. But Dr. Manhattan, like a deity overlooking mortals, had nothing but indifference. My purpose? At the question, Dr. Manhattan's eyes drifted further away. His vision passed through the fog of superluminal particles to the 16th of July, 1940. A young engineer named Alan Scott boarded a train but unfortunately suffered a collapse when crossing a bridge. He clung to a green lantern and miraculously survived. This was the story of the Justice Society's first-generation Green Lantern. Time dragged forward, and Dr. Manhattan's eyes fell on the 22nd of November, 1940. Alan Scott donned his mask and sat down at a round table, curious as to who would speak first. This was the first gathering of the Justice Society. This was the story that should have happened. Dr. Manhattan didn't let this happen. On the 16th of July, 1940, Alan Scott got on the train, according to the trajectory of his life. The bridge collapsed, and an accident occurred. A blue arm stretched out and moved the green lantern. So, Alan Scott didn't get it and didn't survive. The first Green Lantern of the Justice Society disappeared. This is an experiment. Dr. Manhattan replied. His eyes stopped on Batman, but he passed through the other person's body and looked into the distant past. On the 18th of April, 1938, Dr. Manhattan left the Watchmen universe and entered the DC universe. The first person he talked to was a down-and-out actor named Carver Coleman. Dr. Manhattan knew everything just by looking at the other party. In December 1928, Carver Coleman came to Los Angeles alone, with only $17 and several changes of clothes. On the 19th of January 1929, Carver Coleman had been delivering newspapers at Paramount Pictures for 8 months, and people still couldn't remember his name. On the 14th of February, Carver Coleman lost his job because the studio was burned down. On the 12th of February, 1937, Carver Coleman was kicked out of Dan Tanner's restaurant because he skipped work to queue up for an audition. On the 18th of April, 1938, Carver Coleman was kicked out by his landlord and had to spend the night on the street. 10 minutes before midnight, he was awakened by blue light and saw him. Dr. Manhattan, who left the Watchmen universe, felt confused for the first time. He came to a new place and met new people. Everything in this world, this universe, was just like a puzzle, and there was no answer yet. So, Dr. Manhattan performed a simple experiment. He invited Carver Coleman, who was down and out, to dinner and tried to foresee the future in 3 minutes. However, it failed. Dr. Manhattan realized that he needed a coordinate for concentration. He stared at Carver Coleman and saw the future 1 year later. On the 18th of April, 1939, Carver Coleman successfully auditioned. A successful attempt made Dr. Manhattan look past the fog and return to normal. His quantum senses seemed to be constantly focusing on this multiverse. What the future might look like was becoming clearer and clearer. On the 18th of April, 1943, Carver Coleman starred in a box office hit. On the 18th of April, 1952, Carver Coleman won the Oscar for Best Actor. On the 18th of April, 1954, Carver Coleman got cancer and died. On the 18th of April, 1955, the opposite seat was empty. For a brief moment, Dr. Manhattan watched the man's life. Then, he noticed a more interesting existence than Carver Coleman. On the 18th of April, 1938, news about Superman quickly spread all over America. There was a man in a red cape lifting a car. Dr. Manhattan realized that this was the beginning of the world's change. A theoretical physicist named Bryce DeWitt suggested the hypothesis that the universe was splitting into different timelines all the time. According to his theory, the birth of parallel worlds was endless, just like the branches of a big tree. The multiverse. Dr. Manhattan opened his mouth and said something that the superheroes on Mars didn't understand. His eyes were still moving around the timeline, and it was at that particular time, the 18th of April, 1938, that Superman first appeared. Dr. Manhattan had a keen sense that the red-caped man called Superman wasn't just the world's first costumed hero, he was also the center of the world and the multiverse. With the appearance of Superman, in July 1940, young engineer Alan Scott would become the Green Lantern. In January of the same year, a university student called Jay Garrick lost consciousness in a school experiment and inhaled hard water vapor. When he woke up, he became the fastest man in the world. This was the first generation Flash. In the same month, archaeologist Carter Hall came into contact with an ancient knife, which awakened the memory of being an Egyptian prince in a previous life. This was Hawkman. In May, a golden helmet with unknown supernatural powers fell into the hands of Kent Nielsen. This was Dr. Fate. In October, Al Pratt, who was repeatedly defeated because of his size, found one of the world's greatest fighters and began training under him. This was the Atom. In April 1939, Wesley Dodds dreamed of a serial killer who took advantage of the World's Fair to cause trouble. He wore a gas mask and caught the killer. This was the first Sandman. In February 1940, Jim Corrigan's body lay still. After that, he came back from the dead and sought revenge. This was the first Spectre. In November 1940, everyone came together, and the Justice Society of America was formed. Dr. Manhattan watched over the past and watched over the story of the costumed superheroes. Then, something unexpected happened. When Dr. Manhattan went further back in time, he was surprised to find that Superman had disappeared. He seemed to have been deleted and was never heard of again. Until 1956, when the man with the red cape showed up in Metropolis. 25 years ago, a meteorite fell over Kent Farm in Kansas. Jonathan and Martha found the Kryptonian orphan, adopted him and named him Clark Kent. Superman disappeared because a mysterious force, undetectable even to Dr. Manhattan, altered his story. Such changes had affected every world in the multiverse at the same time. In October 1986, when Superman arrived on Earth, it changed again, and the story was different. Dr. Manhattan was confused. He couldn't understand this phenomenon. Why did established facts change time and time again? In May 1949, young Clark Kent sat in front of the bed, accompanying his parents, who were about to die. In 1956, Dr. Manhattan watched Clark visiting the graves. In October 1986, he saw the Kent couple, who should have died, still alive. A few years later, Jonathan Kent died in his son's arms again. Dr. Manhattan stood quietly in the palace on Mars while his consciousness traveled through the past and the future. Time was like an empty room to him. He could exist in the past and, at the same time, be present in the future. I misunderstood the nature of this universe. Dr. Manhattan spoke again, saying something that the other superheroes didn't understand. He no longer clung to the past but looked to the future. Following Superman's trajectory and seeing 1,000 years into the future. Clark Kent still existed, rather than disappearing, as Carver Coleman did. Thus, Dr. Manhattan's unquenchable curiosity developed. After becoming a quantum being, the world no longer held any secrets from him. Human beings were too ordinary, and life was too mediocre. Everything seemed the same but was beyond recognition. Until he came to the DC universe and discovered Superman, Dr. Manhattan found something he was interested in again. For example, reshaping the multiverse. If this world, and indeed other parallel universes, all existed and changed because of Superman. So, what would be the result if he directly changed Superman? Therefore, Dr. Manhattan eliminated the first Green Lantern, Alan Scott. On the eve of Clark Kent's senior high school prom, Jonathan and Martha were killed in a car accident. Clark, who had lost his parents, was increasingly estranged from humans. Since then, Dr. Manhattan made several changes. Like having Jonathan Kent die in a tornado. Or maybe let Superman die on Doomsday. The increasing changes caused the multiverse to fluctuate violently. The third-generation Flash Wally West noticed Dr. Manhattan. After that, Batman also got a glimpse. I want to know my end. Dr. Manhattan, for the last time, uttered words that the superheroes couldn't understand. When he made these changes, after observing the changes in Superman, the changes in the world, and the changes in the multiverse, this blue man saw the end of the future. Superman swung his fist at him in anger, and then there was darkness. 100 years, 1,000 years, had passed since then, and nothing had changed. So, did I destroy the world, or did Superman kill me? Dr. Manhattan's trance-like eyes seemed to find focus and looked toward the superheroes that surrounded him. Comment. 7 comments. Vote. Chapter 538, Chapter 535 The End, Punch Through the Multiverse. Batman, I don't think we need to keep talking to this guy. Shazam, with his jumpy personality, emerged from the crowd, kneading his casserole-sized fists with an eager expression. Give him a good, hard punch, and we'll know everything. The strong muscular man's real name was Billy Batson. Don't be fooled by his appearance, he was actually only a 15-year-old kid. By chance, Billy Batson was selected by the Wizard of the Rock of Eternity and got the magic power of 6 gods. As long as he shouted out the name of Shazam, a magic lightning bolt would fall from the sky, turning him into a strong and brave superhero. Billy Batson had the wisdom of Solomon, the power of Hercules, the endurance of Atlas, the divine power of Zeus, the courage of Achilles and the speed of Mercury. Of course, about wisdom of Solomon. It has also been jokingly referred to as the locked wisdom because it was rarely embodied. That's right. If he is a dangerous criminal, he should be put in prison. If he's crazy, let's just beat him up. Arthur Curry Aquaman agreed and swung his trident at the blue man. Batman didn't get the gang together and travel to Mars just to admire the other party's naked body. Nowadays, the Justice League, and by extension, the superhuman types around the world, were being questioned and watched with vigilance. Superman was in a public opinion crisis, and Wonder Woman was forced to take to the stage of the United Nations, ready to make a public speech and salvage the situation. There were still heaps of problems on Earth waiting to be dealt with by the superheroes. They didn't want to waste time on a blue man who didn't like to wear clothes. No matter how powerful the other party was or what kind of conspiracy it was. The crowd wasn't the least bit intimidated. The Justice League was stronger after Flashpoint ended in the New 52 timeline. They defeated the Apocalypse and stopped the Darkseid's invasion. Also, beat back the repeated attacks of the Brainiac and successfully save Earth. Even Mobius, the Anti-Monitor, who masterminded the crisis on Infinite Earths, fell at their feet. Now, facing this blue man of unknown name and origin, these superheroes were filled with the same confidence. "I don't mind if you keep talking for a bit longer. I'm charging by the hour anyway." Constantine, who had a silk-cut cigarette in his mouth, shrugged his shoulders and looked on with a look of amusement. "Speaking of which, do any of you have a nickname for this guy? How about Blue Balls? I think it's appropriate." Dressed in a yellow trench coat, his hair fluttered like a bird's nest, just like a disheveled old man. This was Constantine. He appeared out of place in the line of superheroes. Like a Noi film character showing up in a children's cartoon. No one wants to hear you crack jokes and appreciate your sense of humor. Zatanna covered her forehead and gestured for Constantine to shut up. The latter shrugged. Batman was the one to persuade him to take part in the operation. Naturally, it wouldn't be because of a sense of duty or a sense of justice, such vapid things. Constantine was always the first one to actively jump on board, as long as enough money or benefits were offered. Of course, if there was danger or a price to pay, he was also the first one to run. Zatanna, who was standing next to Constantine, silently took a few steps to pull away. There's no way around it. In terms of reputation, he's probably the worst in the game. Even Swamp Thing was more popular than Constantine. After all, the former was just a little cranky. And with the latter, there was no telling when you would be sold to the devil or tossed out to block a blow. As we all know, Constantine was an asshole in every sense. But ironically, whenever the world was facing destruction, this guy was always resourceful. People had to hold their noses and work with him. "If you'd shut up, I might add an extra 0 to the check, Constantine." Without looking back, Batman unleashed his financial ability straight away and managed to turn the other party into a mute. The reason he called Constantine, Zatanna, and Swamp Thing over from Justice League Dark was to do as much as possible to address the Blue Man on Mars. The Green Lanterns could grasp the energy of the emotional spectrum. Shazam had the power of the gods. Cyborg could suppress on a scientific and technological level. Aquaman and Kara had the strength. Martian Manhunter was responsible for linking everyone's minds and conveying tactical orders. Batman thought that he had thought of every aspect that could possibly go wrong. "I hope you will cooperate and not put up resistance." Batman, dressed in pitch-black armor, spoke in a deep voice. The Blue Man had been surrounded by superheroes. What else could he do but surrender? Green Lantern. Batman looked at Hal Jordan. The latter was the first to raise his power ring. Green light erupted and transformed into a huge chain that bound the Blue Man. The rest of the Green Lanterns followed suit, their emotional electromagnetic spectrum shifting into a variety of weapons and blasting at the immobile Dr. Manhattan. Interesting. Dr. Manhattan didn't resist. He just stared at Hal Jordan's ring. The naked body disintegrated into a stream of particles, evading the many Green Lantern attacks with ease. Then, the quantum body reorganized itself in a flash. He approached Hal Jordan and tried to take his ring off. This gesture triggered the green power ring to burst into an emotionally charged light that flooded the room like a gushing wave. "I'm interested in him." Dr. Manhattan seemed unaffected as a cloud of green light struck his torso without causing much damage. "What's in it?" Hal Jordan let out a roar of rage, his willpower highly focused as he tried to resist Dr. Manhattan. But it was useless. The power ring, which belonged to him, was finally removed. This energy uses emotions as the raw material, which is collected and converted into energy by the ring. A very novel device. Dr. Manhattan clutched the power ring, surveyed it for a moment, and then tossed it to the fallen Hal Jordan. Let's all go together. Against such villains, we don't need to talk about morality. Constantine retreated to the back of the line and roared. Listening to his impassioned tone, they thought he was going to take the lead in the charge. Try magic. Batman gestured. Zatanna spread her hands wide and performed logomancy. As if a cold stream that could even freeze blood rose out of thin air and swept toward Dr. Manhattan. Not to be outdone, Swamp Thing moved. The barren, dry red soil of Mars was abruptly sprouting gigantic trees and vine plants. Thick tentacles waved and broke through the palace like whips, lashing out at their opponent. Shazam mobilized his divine power, and a bright white lightning bolt of magic erupted around him. Magic. You think you're manipulating that mysterious energy, but you're not. Dr. Manhattan remained expressionless, his voice was indifferent. As I see it, the power you harness is only a fragment of creation, a conceptual manifestation. The naked blue man spread his palms. The freezing cold air, the plant growing, the magic lightning, all attacks suddenly disintegrated into atomic dust invisible to the naked eye. Afterwards, he reorganized the unstable mass of energy, taking on an entirely new existence. This is the true face of magic. Dr. Manhattan looked into the palm of his hand at the blazing core and gently blew out a mouthful of air. An infinite amount of light and heat was released, almost as if it was a nuclear explosion. The powerful blast of air instantly destroyed the clock-like palace and sent a flurry of superheroes flying out. Batman, get Superman. Constantine used magic to protect himself from the ripples. He shouted at the pitch-black armor. Not even the Green Lantern and the many magic users were a match for Dr. Manhattan. Who else could stop the other party but the son of Krypton? I can solve it. Kara stood on Mars's soil, defying the violent air currents. Her eyes radiated fiery beams of light. Kryptonian. Dr. Manhattan's eyes flashed white. Supergirl's heat vision failed to break the quantum body. The blue man bent down, grabbed a handful of dirt, and then clenched it. In an instant, matter changed, and green kryptonite appeared. Is this your weakness? Weakness, pain, suffering. The kryptonite radiation was shining on Kara, causing her to lose her strength instantly. What should we do? Even the Justice League is no match for that blue man. The Flash, who was watching the battle from the sidelines, was anxious, especially after seeing Hal Jordan get knocked out. He wanted to rush straight into the battlefield. After all, they were best friends. I know. You can join in, but it won't affect anything other than increasing the number of losses. Luke didn't hide his tracks. He just watched the blue man's every move. The quantum body and the quantum senses enabled Dr. Manhattan to dominate everything, to master the movement of particles of matter and energy. He could disintegrate and restructure at the drop of a hat. For example, he could turn clay into kryptonite. He's able to understand the power of magic and the emotional spectrum from a microscopic perspective and parse it out. Even the Flash, with his speed force, couldn't do anything about Dr. Manhattan, with his Planck time reaction speed. To sum up, this blue man was probably the most difficult opponent the Justice League had ever met. Even if Superman, which was on Earth right now, arrived in time, it would have very little impact on the battle. Are you going to fight? The Flash looked at Superman's older cousin, his eyes flashing with hope. In a few minutes, all the superheroes were on the ground. On the surface of Mars, only the Blue Man stood as before. Even Batman, with one of the most powerful brains, was helpless in the face of the crushing power gap. I have an old score to settle with him. Luke's mouth curved, and he glanced at Dr. Manhattan. The dark red cloak fluttered up, and a step was taken, pulling out a sonic boom-like explosion. No pleasantries, no greetings, just a straightforward punch. For the first time, surprise appeared in Dr. Manhattan's indifferent eyes. You actually came out of that world. Earlier, to prevent Luke from sabotaging his plans, he had specifically banished his opponent to the Watchmen universe. Adrian asked me to send you his regards. Luke clenched his fist, and the space around him shuddered. The next moment, like a shattered mirror, it broke open into a pitch-black void. The emotional energy shield that enveloped Mars' atmosphere took a hit. Like a fragile eggshell, it dissipated. The fallen superheroes looked up, and all they could see was a blur. The man stood tall and magnificent, his cloak raised high as if he occupied the center of the universe, radiating endless light and heat. Dr. Manhattan tried to see through the attack. Ordinary physical combat couldn't hurt his quantum body at all. But the fist that encompassed all the cards of Superdemon, Devastator, Super Kryptonian, Cyborg Superman, Silver Superman, Superboy Prime, wasn't that simple. When the fist was punched out, not only was space broken, but time also began to curl and contract. The Mars beneath their feet wailed in pain as if it would soon fall apart. Is this the end I saw? Dr. Manhattan's eyes drifted off to look at the tall man with blazing eyes and a billowing cloak. That punch sealed off any way out. Space, time. The quantum body couldn't travel through space and time as it normally could for the time being. There was no other way out but to take it head-on. Boom! A loud sound. As if a rumbling thunderclap had stirred the multiverse. Mars, Earth, Darkseid's planet Apocalypse, the headquarters of the Green Lantern Corps, and even the inside of the Source Wall. Those multiverse-level existences felt that terrifying power with unparalleled clarity. No frills, no tricks, just pure power that nearly broke through the dimension of reality. The intense light rolled in like a wave, and all the superheroes on Mars were left blind. When they regained their sights and could see things clearly, Dr. Manhattan had disappeared, and there was no sign of the tall man who was as imposing and powerful as the other. Comment. 14 comments. Vote. Chapter 539, Chapter 536 Infinite Earth, Save Everything. Binge. Because of a stupid glitch, the chapters got messed up and this wasn't uploaded. Apologies. Thank you for making me aware of this, Overkill Bills. Where did he go? Batman looked around, his eyes no longer on Dr. Manhattan but on the tall man's figure. What happened? Shazam rubbed his head. The terrible shock wave threw him off. That blue man was terrifying. Even the most powerful superhero on the planet recognized it. The beacon of light on Earth, the son of Krypton. He also had weaknesses. Like kryptonite, like magic, like kindness. But the power that Dr. Manhattan had displayed was almost despairing. The Justice League had never met an enemy like him. No flaws, no vulnerabilities, nearly invincible. Was that Clark just now? Supergirl hesitantly asked. She saw a raised dark red cloak and the fiery rays spewing from his eyes. That reminded Kara of Superman. The Superman I know wouldn't be that violent. Batman shook his head. When the man appeared, a murderous wave swept across Mars. This wasn't something Superman would do. Hal, are you okay? Barry, who was watching the battle, saw that the fight was over and rushed up to help his good friend to his feet before saying, "Luke, his name is Luke Cavill. He's also a Kryptonian. Maybe none of you know him, but Luke once helped me stop the great crisis of the destruction of the universe. Like Wall-E, he was probably deleted from the timeline by that blue man. Only Diana and I remember some things." Hearing the Flash say this, Batman's eyes suddenly sharpened. As always, he aptly caught the key words. Kryptonian. Another mighty Kryptonian. How many Kryptonians are there in this universe? Batman felt that the destruction of Krypton was simply a lie. From General Zod to Kara. There's also the Super Kryptonian HL and the Bottle City of Kandor. It seems that a Kryptonian would pop up every now and then. Batman had a headache and even a slight sign of a rise in blood pressure. The increase in Kryptonians meant that there were more targets to monitor and more people to be vigilant of. It's exhausting work. Flash, can you tell me more about Luke? Batman deeply sighed, then asked in a hoarse voice. Luke. Ah. Faced with the brains of the Justice League, Barry behaved like a student called into the office by the principal. He told them all about what he had seen at the Marvel studio. It's not like it's a secret that needs to be hidden. Another multiverse. Batman finally couldn't keep his indifferent tone and showed a hint of surprise. He looked out over the empty battlefield, worry surfacing in his deep eyes. Turning back the clock to 3 minutes ago. The superheroes on Mars could have seen this scene. The tall man's aura was like a volcano erupting, his fiery eyes spewing light. The dark cloak was raised high, and the hard fist swung. It instantly broke through the space-time dimension. Time was like a complicated line curled backward, while space became a thin sheet of folded and twisted paper. The matter was annihilated, shattered, and then formed a vacuum of nothingness. The only thing that remained intact was the quantum body of the blue man. The tidal wave of blue energy was like a mountain of light, but it all parted and disappeared in front of Superman's iron fist. Boom! A loud, silent boom in the void. The whole multiverse was shaken. The seemingly slow process actually took no more than Planck time. Superman's fist smashed into Dr. Manhattan's head, hard. The quantum body, which was neither material nor energetic, was like a watermelon that had been pierced by a bullet. It burst into flames and was reduced to nothing. Thick darkness enveloped Dr. Manhattan. This was the future he saw, the ending he saw. My death. I see. Dr. Manhattan suddenly said. For the first time since possessing his quantum body, he could clearly feel the threat of death. Superman's iron fist, which seemed to contain some kind of power, stubbornly prevented his torso from reorganizing. Death. Dr. Manhattan sensed an aura similar to divine power. If a more appropriate word was used, it might be rule or authority. His consciousness drifted in the sea of quanta, struggling to dominate matter, to dominate particles, to restore that one body. After becoming Dr. Manhattan, he wouldn't age or die. Pain, weakness, fear, these basic human feelings were forgotten. Even Ozymandias tried to kill him with the energy of the intrinsic field subtractor at that time. Dr. Manhattan didn't feel like he was in danger. But this time, it was different. This Superman was from another universe. Had strength beyond common sense. Can't reorganize the body from the current timeline, then go to another. Dr. Manhattan decided to follow the curled-up timeline to avoid Superman's next attack. His mind transcended space and time, gaining the possibility of infinite quantum changes. Thus, existing on all timelines, above all points in time. You're thinking too highly of yourself, Doctor. Luke took a step forward and was the first to rush into the curled, fragmented space-time. The bioforce field was fully open. Using the silver Superman card that could pull an entire galaxy, he easily enveloped this space-time and took it to an alternate timeline. The Justice League world was changed by Superman's older cousin. In another timeline. After Luke left, Superman stepped out of his small town in Kansas to become the hope of Metropolis. Lex Luthor took over Vought Enterprise. Everyone had a bright future. Later, Superman met Batman, becoming best rivals and best friends. Then Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, Cyborg, Aquaman. They teamed up together and formed a group. Justice followed, and bigger villains followed. Darkseid, the monarch from the planet Apocalypse, tried to take over the blue planet. Everyone went through a crisis, some heroes sacrificed themselves, and some heroes saved the world. Many villains and the Justice League played cops and robbers. The cycle of routines went on and on. Until the crisis on Infinite Earths arrived. In less than a second, the reorganization of Dr. Manhattan's quantum body was complete. But when he opened his eyes, what he saw was darkness. The multiverse was constantly collapsing and disintegrating. It was as if the furnace was burning out and about to be extinguished. One Earth after another was swallowed up, destroyed, and trillions of lives died. This is. A hint of doubt flashed in Dr. Manhattan's indifferent eyes. I came to that point in time. Before he knew it, Superman's fist had crossed time and space. Along with it came Luke's deep voice. This is the crisis on Infinite Earths. This is the day the multiverse will restart, the day the parallel worlds will die out. Bang! The hard fist, once again, shattered Dr. Manhattan's quantum body and returned his consciousness to darkness. Luke stood steady in this space-time. He could feel the multiverse gradually collapsing, about to be swallowed up by an extremely frightening force. The stars trembled, and everything wailed. It was as if the universe was ending. The crisis on Infinite Earths has begun. Luke thought to himself. The source of all this happened tens of billions of years ago. The immortals of the planet Maltus formed an extremely high-class super-ancient civilization. Among them, there was a scientist with twisted desires, Krona. This man had to explore the forbidden secrets, the origin of life and the universe, despite the opposition of his compatriots. Krona's pursuit of knowledge led to a huge disaster affecting the multiverse. The antimatter universe was born. It was a complex world that was diametrically opposite to the positive matter multiverse. Its existence had also led to the fragmentation of the positive matter multiverse, giving rise to the concept of parallel universes. The immortals of the planet Maltus had responded to the crisis by researching and harnessing the power of the emotional spectrum to create the Green Lantern Corps. Then, other Lantern Corps were born. This was the ancient legend recorded in the Book of Oa. Luke wasn't only aware of this secret, he was also aware of the protector of the positive matter multiverse, called the Monitor. The keeper of the antimatter universe was called the Antimonitor. The Antimonitor had always wanted to devour the matter universe, thus weakening the Monitor's power and making himself the only one in existence. Now, his wish was coming true. Millions of parallel universes were being swallowed up and destroyed. The power of the Antimonitor had reached its peak, standing at the apex of the multiverse. As long as he used the antimatter cannon again, destroying all the parallel universes in one fell swoop and devouring this unimaginably terrifying energy. It was quite possible, then, that the Anti-Monitor would push open the doors of the Omniverse. Be aware that after the outbreak of the crisis on Infinite Earths, even Darkseid, under the pressure of survival, cooperated with the Justice League. It was evident at this point how frightening the Anti-Monitor was. Luke used his supervision to take in the destruction of the entire multiverse. He saw superheroes from various parallel universes struggling to resist but unable to do any damage in the face of the immensely powerful Anti-Monitor. Solve the trouble for my little cousin, and get the anti-life equation in the process. Luke lightly thought so. The reason why the Anti-Monitor was so powerful was mainly because of that terrifying equation. Loneliness plus alienation plus fear plus despair plus self-worth divided by mockery divided by condemnation divided by misunderstanding x guilt x shame x failure x judgment n equals y, where y equals hope and n equals folly, love equals lies, life equals death, self equals dark side. It was said that this anti-life equation was a transcendental mathematical formula. It could engulf any substance and manipulate any life. It was the most dangerous weapon in the multiverse. Once possessed, it could manipulate others at will, influence their thinking and submit to the user of the equations. Even multiverse-level beings couldn't defend themselves against it. The Dark Lord of the Apocalypse, Darkseid, had always wanted it. The Anti-Monitor, who held the anti-life equation, was at his most powerful state. Not even the Spectre, who personified the avenging wrath of God, couldn't judge. The landscape was, of course, limited to this story. In several major events since then, the Anti-Monitor, who had lost the anti-life equation, was captured by Necron and crafted into the total energy source for the Black Lantern Corps. The momentum kept coming down, to the point where he could even blow Dr. Manhattan's head off at will. The dark cloak slightly swung up. In the next moment, Luke appeared in the antimatter universe. At this point, the superhero was exhausted. The voice of the Anti-Monitor shook the universe. Today is the last day of the matter multiverse. Your world will die, as will those who have tried to stop me. Do you hear that bell ringing? That will be the last sound you will ever hear. Superman covered his head in pain as he heard the prayers, and the panic of the multiverse and saw the terrible sight of a planet burning, releasing its light and heat, and finally returning to nothingness. I'm going to save. The majestic heat vision struck the Anti-Monitor's armor without even leaving a scratch. You can't save anything, Superman. The huge figure standing in the antimatter universe stomped down with a terrifying force that shattered the heavenly bodies. The energy shield held up by the many superheroes broke in an instant. I will make you witness with your own eyes how your world is destroyed. The Anti-Monitor roared, ready to activate the antimatter cannon. The Flash struggled to stand up. He wanted to sacrifice himself and destroy this terrible weapon that destroyed the positive matter cannon. I have to use Speed Force, I can do this. This time, there's no need for you to sacrifice yourself. Luke appeared in front of the Justice League. Exhausted and weary, Superman saw the dark red cloak. Memories hidden in his heart were immediately awakened, and various scenes came flooding in. Cousin. In the end, all the memories were turned into an address. Leave it to me. Luke didn't look back but took a step forward. The fluttering cloak seemed to cover the whole multiverse. The tall and straight figure was like a huge celestial body, stretching across the crowd's field of vision. Are you? The Anti-Monitor didn't even finish his sentence before a punch came blasting through. The former was at the most satisfying and peak moment of his life. How could he bear such a provocation? The power of the anti-life equation, transformed into a blinding light that illuminated the multiverse, enveloped Luke with the intention of corrupting and controlling him. But the 10th metal in the latter's body erupted with a brilliant silver glow, the power of the source, tenaciously resisting the violent erosion of the anti-life equation. With a grip of Luke's palm, a stellar celestial object shrunk into a round ball, which he squeezed and slammed hard into the Anti-Monitor's armor. The collision between the positive and antimatter universes seemed to have been crushed by a rumble of thunder. Every living being in the parallel universes could feel a terrifying aura sweeping over them. The Anti-Monitor fell. Devouring the anti-life energy of numerous parallel universes wasn't enough to give him security in the face of the tall, expressionless man. It's not just the end of the multiverse, but your end, Luke quietly said. He looked down at the fallen Anti-Monitor and severely stepped on him. The timeline of the past had actually been taken over by Superman. Dr. Manhattan's consciousness still existed. He witnessed how Luke killed the creature in the armor. The anti-life energy spilled out and was directly absorbed by Superman. The future. Superman won't find me in the future. Dr. Manhattan forcibly broke away from this point in time and traveled to a more distant future. When his body reorganized, he opened his eyes. This time, Superman's iron fist didn't attack. But Dr. Manhattan heard a chilling, frantic laugh. Ha 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 ha. The laughter was as dark as Owlman's and as crazy as a madman's. The mere sound of it sent chills down one's spine. Which timeline is this? Dr. Manhattan walked on a desolate planet, his sight only able to see the results but not the process. However, the blue man soon knew the answer. A slender bat-like black shadow enveloped the multiverse. In front of him, there was a woman. That was the mother of the multiverse, Perpetua. She was an all-powerful god standing in the 6th dimension, and she was the being who created everything. The three sons of Perpetua were the World Forger, who created the Dark Multiverse, and the Monitor and Anti-Monitors, who Luke had killed. This all-powerful cosmic-level goddess of creation was originally sealed within the source wall by her son. Later, the source wall broke. However, Perpetua was successfully unsealed by the machinations of the Batman who laughs. The one who laughs was from Earth 22 in the Dark Multiverse, and he was one of many Batmen. One day, he contracted a virus after killing the Joker. So, Batman and the Joker, two sides of a coin, fused into one. After transforming into the Batman who laughs, he engineered the extermination of his Bat family by killing Nightwing, Red Hood, Red Robin, and Batgirl. And transformed his son, Damian, into the beastly, maniacal Dark Robin with the Joker virus. After committing all these heinous acts, Laughs turned on the Justice League. It was a bloody and brutal story. After finally killing all the targets he could inflict violence on, Laughs was recruited by Barbatos to join the Dark Knights as one of the 7 Nightmare Batmen. Laughs had now become the most powerful being in the multiverse through countless plots and plans, and the Everything is Within Expectation plugin. As long as he defeated Perpetua, the goddess of creation, whose power hadn't been restored yet, Laughs could take over the multiverse and create and destroy the world as he pleased. Soon, the Batman who laughs will kill Perpetua. When she dies, he will create a nightmare universe, where there would be no place for us. The discussion of the Justice League reached Dr. Manhattan's ears across a great distance. Another multiverse about to fall into extinction, waiting to be restarted again. The future is surprisingly like this. Quantum life had no emotions, but Dr. Manhattan still felt sad. Whether it was the past or the future, the fate of the multiverse was too dark. Perhaps Superman's numerous changes are part of the multiverse's reset. Dr. Manhattan suddenly looked up at the two ethereal projections standing in a higher dimension, filling the multiverse. The Batman Who Laughs, and Perpetua. Everything is like a story that was constantly being redacted. We are all characters in the book, and as such, we can't step outside the plot. Dr. Manhattan seemed to figure out where the mysterious force that made Superman's story different each time came from. That was the higher world of the goddess of creation. The greatest secret hidden in the depths of the omniverse. You already knew that, didn't you? Dr. Manhattan turned back to the tall man who had crossed time and space to catch up again. Yes. Luke, who had the Superboy Prime card, was staring into the void. He was like the presenter facing the camera or an actor filming a scene. Every restart of the multiverse is the end of a story. Luke was explaining like he was reading some kind of narration. Popular superheroes and villains are preserved, adding more detail and setting to start a whole new life. Unwanted characters, gradually marginalized, become background boards, and no longer appeared. Doctor, this is the truth of the multiverse. Everyone is a puppet on a string and won't even remember each time they got erased or rebooted. Dr. Manhattan was silent. He fancied himself a quantum observer. Observing the changes in everything and the world from an elevated perspective. Unbeknownst to him, other creatures at higher latitudes were doing similar things in a similar way to himself. What do you want to do? Dr. Manhattan asked. All the grudges seem so insignificant when placed in front of the great event of the multiverse's demise and reboot. Since fate ends in darkness, surely Superman would do something to stop this awful ending. Shut that guy up who keeps making that ugly laugh, take over this multiverse instead of Perpetua. Luke lightly said. Where do you get your confidence from? Dr. Manhattan was very confused. Luke was a multiverse level at best. He had no chance of winning against the equally powerful Batman Who Laughs and Perpetua, who was once an omniverse-level being. The power of the 10th metal's origin, part of the power of death, the fourth wall power of Superboy Prime. Even if everything was combined, it would be impossible to overcome two strong opponents. It might be close on my own, but with you, it might be different. Luke said with a smile. Aren't we enemies? Dr. Manhattan was even more puzzled. He didn't seem to be able to use the logic of human behavior and analyze the other party. You banished me once, and I beat you to death twice, so we're even. Luke waved his hand graciously and spoke in a compelling tone. Do you want to see this multiverse die out? Then you'd have to go back to the Watchmen universe and face Ozymandias again. That quiet and boring life. Stay here, and you can witness all kinds of exciting stories. For the first time, a humane look emerged from Dr. Manhattan, and his eyes lit up with a glint. He was moved. What else can you give me besides that? Dr. Manhattan asked quite bluntly. A job. Luke snapped his fingers. He didn't pay attention to the Batman Who Laughs and Perpetua, who were engaged in a fierce battle. Even without Dr. Manhattan's help, through the influence of time traveling downstream, they could surely unite the superheroes to defeat the other party eventually. This was the destined end of the story. What Luke wanted was to adjust it a little and add his own part. The loss of beings such as the World Forger, the Monitor and Anti-Monitor, and the goddess of creation, Perpetua. This multiverse was tantamount to being without a manager, leaving many positions waiting to be filled. I have the means to ignite the World Forge. If I can defeat those two guys, then I will need a forger, a watcher, and an order keeper. Looking at Dr. Manhattan, Luke offered his fee. Which one would you like to be? Or are you interested in all three jobs? Dr. Manhattan didn't speak, quietly considering. Above the higher dimensions, the battle between Laughs and Perpetua intensified. At present, the former seemed to have the upper hand. Ha 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 ha. That scary, crazy laughter echoed in every corner of the multiverse. Which one are you going to let me deal with? A moment later, Dr. Manhattan asked. For a quantum being with no normal biological or emotional needs, there was indeed nothing more tempting than an all-encompassing view of the multiverse. Besides, he was curious as to what was behind the omniverse. How about Perpetua? Luke looked up at the slender black shadow. I hate that guy's laughter. It's too harsh and ugly. Dr. Manhattan nodded as a burst of blue light dissipated and moved to the sixth dimension. And Luke disappeared and appeared in front of the laughing bat. A new face. Kryptonian. Superman. Do you need me to tell you the story of how I slaughtered Metropolis? Laughs, who had already reached the apex of the multiverse, wasn't surprised to see Luke. After all, everything was within his expectations. He instantly learned everything about this new face from the timeline of the past. Superman's older cousin. Established Vought Enterprise. Lex Luthor's godfather. All kinds of information poured into Laugh's head. In a tone of someone who saw through everything, he mockingly laughed, no matter where you come from, no matter how strong you are, the Kryptonian can never defeat the Batman. That's the Iron Law. Ha 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 ha. Killing another Superman would be so satisfying. Luke listened quietly and waited until the Batman who laughs was again, emitting that chilling and maddening laugh. He clenched his fist, strode forward, and swung it out. That was a full-powered swing. A multitude of Superman cards rolled into one, bursting with unparalleled force. Luke's fist pierced straight through the barrier of the sixth dimension. The multiverse, which was turning into nothingness and darkness, seemed to have been blasted by a strong light that illuminated everything. The slender figure of the laughing bat, like a melted candle, became distorted. He smashed against the source wall. Then, he heard an indifferent voice from above. Keep laughing. Comment. 4 comments. Vote. Chapter 540, Chapter 537 Epilogue, The Omniverse, One Final Story. Keep laughing. The indifferent voice, accompanied by a hard fist, slammed down together on the body of the Batman who laughs. The slender black shadow that filled the multiverse seemed to melt like wax oil, shrinking in size for no reason at all. The shrill, frightening, maddening laughter that reached every corner came to a screeching halt. The Batman who laughs lost his laugh, as if he was choked. How is this possible? The always anticipating everything, calculative Batman who laughs uttered the words of a third-rate villain. He himself managed to steal most of Perpetua's power through countless plots and foresight. With the help of countless dark multiverse Batman destroying the Justice League's defenses and spreading nightmarish laughter everywhere. Nowadays, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, those superheroes were helpless against him. Even the goddess of creation was losing ground. Who else in this multiverse could stop him? Such thoughts, a second ago, occupied Batman Who Laughs' entire brain. Until Superman jumped out of nowhere and woke him up. That's the end of it. To be honest, I'm sick of you blathering on about, I saw this coming, all that clumsy plotting and scheming. I also hate your harsh, noisy, ugly, castrated rooster-like laugh. Your novice protection period has ended since Barbatos used Batman as a portal to gather the Dark Knights and had prepared to open the Dark Multiverse. Luke had no qualms about releasing the power within him. The reason why he could do harm to the Batman Who Laughs was because of the Superboy Prime card. The latter came from Earth Prime, where all superheroes were fictional characters from comics. Therefore, the Superboy Prime actually came from the reality dimension. Not only was there a comic about the Justice League there, but there was also an editorial department. Luke, who had obtained the Superboy Prime card, could not only break the fourth wall like Deadpool but also had the ability to break through the sixth dimension. No matter how powerful Laughs was, as long as he hadn't entered the Omniverse, he could intervene in the direction of the story and modify the ending of the story. Then, he was just a marionette puppet who couldn't step out of the comic frame and defy the comic settings. You can't kill me. This multiverse is about to restart. Those dead superheroes, destroyed parallel universes, they can all be reborn after the reboot. Laughs collapsed on the remains of the source wall and spoke in a shrill voice, if you kill me and stop another restart of the multiverse, then they would all really be dead. Luke gazed at the laughing bat that had fallen from the sixth dimension. A puzzled look flashed in his eyes as he rhetorically asked, what does that have to do with me? Laughs, who excelled at sophistry and deception, got stuck and seemed unsure of how to proceed. I don't care about the reboot of the multiverse, and I don't care about the lives and deaths of countless people, I simply want to beat you to death, that's all. Luke's face looked expressionless, as he dragged Laughs, who couldn't resist. Since Superboy Prime could do great damage to this guy. Then, against the more powerful Luke. There was nothing else the laughing bat could do but spin his little brain and launch a constant stream of verbal shots. Superboy Prime came from Earth Prime, and he had secured this card. So, Luke didn't need to worry about Batman's everything is within my expectation ability. Do you want to guess what I'm planning to do next? His mouth curled in a mocking smile as he teased, guess right and I might cut you some slack. Laughs seemed to sense death coming and struggled desperately as he kept throwing out guess after guess. But Luke turned a deaf ear to it, erasing the guy's everything is within my expectation ability. The so-called ultimate boss that fused Batman and the Joker and spread dark nightmares was nothing more than a waste. I gave you a chance. You're smarter than Batman and crazier than the Joker, you can't even guess what I'm thinking, what a failure of a character. Luke reached the end of the multiverse, a place more distant and empty than the source wall. A dead crimson sun appeared in his line of sight. This wasn't an actual star, but a giant tomb where every Earth was absorbed after Laughs destroyed the multiverse. All the stories, all the characters, would become the flames of this dying sun and perish with it. Say goodbye to the world. Luke held down Laughs and rushed to the burning dying sun. The twisted, elongated black shadow shrank as the flames of destruction consumed everything, billowing out a dense smoke that contained the power of nightmares. Even if I die, the multiverse will still be in a constant cycle of back and forth. There would still be villains like me, playing out an insipid story with those superheroes. Very close to death, Laughs spoke in a sharp voice. No more, I can put an end to this, I can make everything more exciting. The dark red cloak melted with the flames of destruction as Luke broke into the core of the dying sun, and then watched the Batman Who Laughs turn to dust. Boom! With the complete death of the Batman Who Laughs, the dark multiverse collapsed. In the endless void, only a tall figure stood alone. Superman. The survivors shouted out the name. A brilliant golden glow filled the surface of his body, like a dazzling star that couldn't be looked at. Luke, who had finally unlocked the golden Superman template, looked down at the upcoming reboot of the multiverse. With a faint smile on his face, he took a step and disappeared from everyone's sights. A few months later. Watchtower headquarters. Where exactly did you go? What did you see? This was the 42nd time that the Flash had asked the same question. Curiosity killed the cat, Barry. Luke shook his head and didn't answer. Everyone in the Justice League wanted to know whether they had finally entered the Omniverse and pushed open the ultimate door. But I really want to know. Barry blinked his eyes with a pitiful look on his face. Well then, it's my biggest secret and you mustn't pass it on. Luke lowered his voice and cautiously said. I promise. I will never tell anyone anything. Even if Batman tortured me. The Flash patted his chest and made a promise. Unfortunately, when it came to the second half of the sentence, there was some lack of confidence. It's nothing really, I just met two hometown folks. Luke chuckled lightly and told Barry the answer. They've prepared a big plan that involves the future of both multiverses. Barry looked puzzled and didn't understand what he meant. Hometown folks. From New York. Or the small town in Kansas. Or Krypton. Luke's mouth quirked up at the corners, punctuating the conversation without further elaboration. The Batman Who Laughs completely died, and the multiverse that should have fallen into his hands was restarted. The timeline belonging to Dr. Manhattan, carrying out the great event of the Doomsday Clock, and the timeline belonging to Luke, starting the crisis on Infinite Earths, merged into one and were no longer distinct. The existence of Superman's older cousin had been accepted by the Justice League. The multiverse, which had lost its administrators, stepped into a whole new phase. Without the barrier of the source wall, our world is completely exposed to the outside worlds. In the Justice League Hall, Batman was discussing important matters with Lex Luthor. Before the Great Death Metal event, the two men were at odds with each other and would never have sat at the same table to discuss issues. But when faced with the Laughing Bat, the Justice League received a lot of help from Lex Luthor. Even Batman, who was always on the highest alert, reluctantly approved of the arrogant guy. Clark's older cousin, my godfather, is from another universe. Lex Luthor swiped the screen and called up the map of the multiverse. According to the information provided by the Flash, that universe is very similar to ours. Crossing his arms and propping his jaw, Batman spoke in a raspy voice, leaving aside the fact that the people over there are friendly or not, our world and theirs are coming closer and closer. Who knows if two universes colliding together will destroy, or create other problems. Lex Luthor was silent for a moment and suddenly laughed. I'm sure the uncle will find a way. You're actually pinning your hopes of solving the problem on someone else. Batman expressed surprise. He knew the other party well. Lex Luthor was a proud and annoying guy. When the world was in danger, he would stand up and act as a hero. He could also be indifferent to the lives of others, and would do anything to achieve his goals. But no matter what, Lex Luthor had always believed only in himself. Others, in his view, were just tools. First of all, it's none other than Luke, my godfather. Lex said with a straight face. Secondly, whether you and I accept it or not, we have to admit the fact that the universe belongs to him now. Batman kept silent. Perpetua, the goddess of creation, became Luke's worker under the control of anti-life equation. The Batman who laughs was completely erased and disappeared from the story forever. Dr. Manhattan took over the work of the World Forger and Monitor, observing the changes and development of the multiverse at all times. After all this, the Justice League couldn't get involved, and wasn't qualified to speak. Give yourself a break, Batman. Lex Luthor switched off the macro map of the multiverse and spoke in a relaxed tone. I have a hunch that the story of what will happen in the future will be even more exciting. Paradise Island. As the sun set, the endless ocean gleamed with golden light. Diana sat on a protruding reef, her eyes in a trance, gazing into the distance. For some reason, she enjoyed the quiet. It's only at these moments that the gallant Amazon princess revealed the softness inside her. The setting sun slowly sank into the sea, with only half a silhouette remaining. A series of tracks suddenly appeared on the beach. Long time no see, Diana. A warm voice reached Wonder Woman's ears. She inclined her head and looked at the young man with a smile at the corners of his lips. This scene was familiar. That picture. Diana remembered the old picture she gave to the Flash, which showed a man and woman snuggling intimately. As if a bright light had passed through her head, dusty memories came flooding back like a tidal wave. You let me wait for so long. Wonder Woman, sitting on the reef, flung herself into the man's arms. Click. It was as if the shutter had sounded. A beautiful silhouette was framed. This is the end of the story. A hand gently closed the book. Luke caressed the child sitting on his lap and smiled. It's time to go to bed. Hey, I haven't heard the part about the Justice League versus the Avengers. The little girl, who looked like she was only 5 or 6 years old, shook Luke's arm and shouted, "Tell me more. Dad, I want to know what happens when the two multiverses merge." It's late, let's read it next time. Luke gave the cute little porcelain doll-like girl a squeeze and ignored the big, fluttering, dark eyes as he carried his daughter back to bed and tucked her in. Good night, Dad. I love 3000. The little girl hugged the stuffed teddy bear and kissed Luke on the cheek. Good night, baby. Luke smiled contentedly, turned the bedside lamp off, and closed the door to the room. A few minutes later, he returned to his study. He opened a brand new book, held a pen and wrote a sentence. The beginning of a new story. Binge. This, my readers, is the actual end. Thank you for reading this novel. Although the ending wasn't all the hyped, but it was somewhat alright. We enjoyed translating this fanfic for you, and now we have begun another book. So without delay, head on to my profile and check out the latest book.